Chapter 865. Long's here. Ron couldn't help but be startled when he heard the news. This wasn't good news for him, as it added a lot of variables to his mission of destroying the spatial gate. 23. WX. Even Long's here? Is it really because we're undead? Why are these orcs acting like they're facing a great enemy? Ron's mind raced, but he couldn't figure it out. He wasn't the only one who couldn't figure it out. Even Cronia couldn't figure it out. If such a powerful force was really used to deal with the undead, it was simply too absurd. No matter what, we must destroy the spatial gate. Ron secretly made up his mind. At this time, the giant wolf walking in front suddenly sniffed towards the sky and let out a few low howls. The orc patrolling soldier immediately stopped and looked around with vigilant eyes as he shouted sternly, "Who's there? Come out. Oh no, we've been discovered." Ron was anxious. He was about to show himself and kill that orc on the spot when he saw Cronia give him a look. He couldn't help but be startled. Boom! A huge ball of light suddenly fell from the sky and bloomed among the orcs. The light from the explosion was like a sharp sword, and the orcs fell to the ground one after another. What? Ron came back to his senses. It turned out that the other party hadn't discovered him at all. It was someone else. No wonder Cronia had been so calm and kept winking at him. "We've been exposed. Quick, kill your way to the spatial gate." With a shout, a beautiful figure instantly appeared from the sky and charged toward the orcs. "It's them." Ron recognized them at a glance. They were none other than the caravan from the main plane of order. The woman was Alice. At this moment, she was already fighting the orcs. Her exquisite long sword danced in the air, and the orcs fell to the ground one after another. Gray appeared from the shadows like a ghost and said in a deep voice, "There's no point in hiding our identities now. Transform. Comrades, let these ugly and dirty orcs see our true strength. Kill." Everyone in the caravan shouted. Then, rays of dazzling light lit up on their bodies. Behind their thick armor, pairs of pure white wings spread out and flapped gently. In the night sky, they were as brilliant as the sun, illuminating the entire city as if it were daytime. There were only a dozen of them, but they exploded with a shocking fighting spirit. They took out weapons from their spatial rings and joined the battle. "It's the angels. Angels of the Holy Angel Corps. Quick, sound the alarm. Don't let them escape. Kill." The tranquility of the night was completely broken. The orcs began to regain their senses. Some orcs ran to the clock tower above the city wall and pulled the mechanism. The alarm sounded throughout the entire city, and all of the orcs in the Forgotten City were alarmed. They all picked up their weapons and gathered at the spatial gates. Kill! 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 After transforming into angels, Gray, Alice, and the others were more than 10 times stronger than before. At this moment, they were like tigers in a flock of sheep, wantonly killing. Although the orcs were much taller than them, their armor was like paper in front of these powerful angels. The powerful Guangming's power broke through their power. Blood, organs, and broken limbs flew everywhere. These powerful angels were like precision instruments, advancing and retreating in an orderly manner. Although they were few in number, they were like a sharp sword, stabbing at the orcs' hearts. Gray was the core of the entire angel squad. He held a heavy one-handed scepter in one hand and a sturdy half-body shield in the other. He spread his wings and flapped them a few times, rising into the air. Then, he quickly rushed in front of an orc frostwolf knight. The one-handed scepter in his hand smashed heavily on the orc's head. The orc didn't even have time to scream before his head exploded like a watermelon. It was a perfect kill. With wings, the angels were born with the ability to fly. They had a powerful advantage in battle. They stood at the top of all living beings like gods, lowering their heads to look down on thousands of lowly creatures. This also caused them to be blindly arrogant and condescending. "Don't fight, immediately destroy the spatial gate." Gray shouted. "Angels, they really are angels." Ron, Shea, and Cronia opened their mouths wide in shock, speechless for a long time. They didn't think that Gray and Alice, who had traveled with them, were actually angels from the Order plane. In that case, All the problems were easily solved. Why did Long come personally? Why did the orcs look like they were facing a great enemy? Why? Because the angels had come, a powerful force from the Order Plane. These beings that occupied the top of the main plane. Even the orcs had to be cautious. What do we do? The situation was chaotic now, and there was no longer a need to hide. Cronia slowly revealed herself, her eyes fixed on the battlefield as she softly asked. Their target is also the spatial gate. Looks like the angels and orcs are about to fight. Ron muttered to himself. He immediately thought of the key and made a prompt decision. Let's go. While they're delaying the orcs, let's go to the spatial gate. Yes, Shea and Cronia replied in unison. The orcs had already deployed a large number of troops at the spatial gate. The appearance of Gray and the others was like a magnet, attracting all the orcs. Ron's side, on the other hand, seemed to have entered a no-man's land. Ron, Shea, and Cronia quickly arrived at the spatial gate. Who's there? The orc soldier guarding the spatial gate quickly discovered the three of them and shouted with a huge axe in his hand. Swish, a sound was heard. A bright light flashed, and the orc could be seen clutching his neck in pain, blood gushing out like a fountain. Hurry, hurry. Ron was like a ferocious tiger descending the mountain. He held a bone spear in his hand, and when he found an orc soldier, he quickly killed his way to the spatial gate. The spatial gate. There are also enemies at the spatial gate. The orc soldier said with a trembling voice. Sound the alarm and activate the spatial gate immediately. The orc captain shouted. Have reinforcements from the main plane, hurry. Rumble. With a sound, the space gate was activated. The two huge stone pillars were entwined with lightning, and not long after, they formed a huge vortex. Countless bolts of lightning fell from the sky, and a powerful spatial energy spread in all directions. Even the entire Forgotten City was lightly shaking. The spatial gate. The spatial gate has been activated. Seeing this scene, Alice's face was deathly pale. At this moment, her body was covered in blood, and even her pure white wings were no exception. We have to be quick, otherwise it'll be too late. Gray was much calmer than Alice. Even if we die, we have to complete the mission. Fight. Kill. The team of angels roared in unison. At this moment, their faces were filled with determination. They consciously formed a battle formation, while Gray and Alice charged towards the spatial gate. Other than Gray and Alice, everyone else stayed behind to block the endless orc army behind. No matter how strong the angels were, they only had a dozen or so people. If they stayed behind, only death awaited them. Success or failure depended on this one move. They did not hesitate to sacrifice themselves. The giant wolf knights quickly broke through, and the Kodo knights beat the huge drums at their waists. The two-legged giant dragon stationed at the four corners of the Forgotten City descended from the sky, and the Tauren warriors, the most powerful soldiers of the orcs, also appeared on the battlefield. They shook their huge heads, carried heavy totems on their backs, wore heavy armor, and held all kinds of weapons in their hands. They took heavy steps, and every step caused the earth to tremble. 1, 2. With the orcs' continuous reinforcements, the team of angels fell one by one into a pool of blood. The battle became more and more intense, and the sound of killing spread to every corner of the city. In the Forgotten City, the undead who did not know what was happening began to panic. Roar. An earth-shattering roar caused the entire Forgotten City to tremble. A terrifying power erupted like a mountain, and the entire city was enveloped in a layer of shadow. Angels, how dare you? Even if you're an angel army of holy light, I'll make sure you don't return today. With a thunderous voice, Long's tall figure charged over like a tank, and the orcs in front of him were sent flying. Raging Ripper was Lung's title. At this moment, he appeared on the battlefield. He was clad in heavy armor and held a huge long sword in his hand. His ugly face was distorted due to anger. He was a god, a powerful god. Even an angel would not dare to be presumptuous in front of him. Long has appeared. Alice's face was filled with fear. Every powerful hero had countless outstanding achievements behind them. Although they had not fought, Alice knew that she would not be able to block one of Long's attacks. Gray's face was as calm as water, and no expression could be seen. "We have to hurry. Gray, look, what's that?" At this moment, Alice screamed as if she had discovered a new continent. "It's Ron. What are they doing here?" Gray also saw Ron. "The spatial gate. Their target is also the spatial gate." Alice said with joy. "What? Why would the undead destroy the spatial gate?" Gray's face was filled with shock. At this moment, he gritted his teeth. "I don't care. I have to complete the mission no matter what. Where do you think you're going?" At this moment, a loud shout was heard. Long had used the orc's battle skill, leap. Like a flea, he jumped into the air, raised a long sword in his hand, and slashed down fiercely. "Alice, block him!" Gray shouted loudly. Yes. Alice subconsciously obeyed Gray's order. She suddenly activated her defense, and countless glowing runes revolved around her body. She raised her shield high in the air and welcomed the arrival of the storm. Boom! Chapter 866. No matter how powerful Alice was, how could she be Long's match? Long was a god, a true god, a powerhouse who had comprehended the power of the beast god. Even if Alice used Guangming's divine power, she still couldn't defeat a true god. Long was even more powerful than Utaris. Alice heavily fell to the ground, one of her pure white wings broken. At this moment, she was like an angel who had fallen into the mortal world, watching Long approach step by step, her heart filled with sorrow and despair. Alice raised her head with difficulty and glanced at Gray. She saw Gray quickly flapping his wings and flying forward without looking back. He didn't even look back. His goal was the spatial gate. "Gray!" Alice softly called out, her eyes filled with disappointment. She knew that Gray was doing the right thing. For the sake of the mission, he would do anything. Even if it was her, she had to sacrifice herself when needed. This was order, an emotionless order. However, Alice didn't dare to believe that Gray was such a person. Their secret vow of eternal love was like child's play to her. The current Gray simply didn't care about her. "Soon, just a bit faster. As long as I destroy the spatial gate, Lady Emily will definitely reward me handsomely." Gray's eyes were filled with intense passion. At this moment, he had already completely thrown Alice to the back of his mind. A scene slowly appeared in his mind. Gray, dressed in martial attire, kneeling on one knee in front of Emily. Emily was standing with her hand on his head, loudly reading God's decree. At this moment, he saw the envious gazes of the other angels. He leaped up and became the most popular person in front of Emily. All of this was because of the spatial gate. As long as I destroy the spatial gate and block the Beastman's reinforcements, I'll be the greatest contributor to the Holy Light Legion. Stepping on the blood of his fellow angels, Gray had already arrived in front of the spatial gate. His gaze met with Ron, but there was no communication. "It's an angel. An angel is coming. Stop him." Ron, Shea, and Cronia were in the middle of fighting and had no time to care about the spatial gate. At this moment, the spatial gate slowly rotated and countless beastmen appeared in the void. The space gate is about to start the teleportation. Ron's heart sank. He squeezed the interspatial ring in his hand. "Don't tell me. Am I really going to expose my identity?" Taking out the Calamity Divine Staff, showing off his great power, and risking exposing everything to destroy the spatial door. Ron hesitated, calculating whether his actions were worth it. "Kill! Kill! Kill!" Long began to slaughter his way into the group of angels. In front of Long, these powerful angels were like children fighting against an adult. They couldn't resist at all. Long slashed one angel after another, causing them to fall into a pool of blood. At this time, Long had also noticed Gray's actions. He raised his sword high and stopped in front of the last angel. Long was not stupid. In fact, no one who had reached the level of a god was as stupid as a pig. He quickly understood that there was something more important than killing. Seeing that Gray was already close to the dimensional door, Long finally understood the plan of the angel squad. Instantly, his eyes widened in anger. Mother asterisk her, you dare? Guangming's warhammer. Gray roared. At this moment, he had already thrown caution to the wind. He raised his scepter high, and a hexagram that emitted white light appeared on his body. A warhammer that was formed by light spun around his body. Then, he slammed it towards the dimensional door. Boom! The powerful force of Guangming bombarded the dimensional door, causing the space to tremble violently. A small crack appeared on the tall totem pole. It had to be said that the orcs' buildings were quite sturdy. Although the dimensional door was damaged, it did not collapse. However, it was already on the verge of collapse. The power of the space was also beginning to become unstable. Roar! At this time, Long could no longer care about Alice. He roared and suddenly jumped up, rushing towards Gray's direction. The orcs' attacks were even more urgent. They knew that once the dimensional door was destroyed, it would affect the entire battle. However, Ron, Shea, and Shea were holding back a large number of orcs. Shea and Cronia were already covered in blood. Gray glanced at Ron. Both of them exchanged glances, but did not communicate. At this time, Gray's Guangming's warhammer made a circle in the air and returned to his body. At this time, all the angels had died in battle except for Alice. However, she was also on the verge of death. Gray smiled. Hee, my mission is about to be completed. Victory belongs to the Holy Light Angel Squad. Long, no matter how strong you are, you can't stop me now. After saying that, Guangming's warhammer struck out again. Accompanied by a powerful force, it blasted towards the two totem poles. This time, he used the Guangming's divine power that Lady Emily had bestowed upon him. No! Long shouted. At this moment, he was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He should not have been entangled with these angels. Instead, he should have rushed over to protect the dimensional door. As long as he stood in front of the dimensional door, no one would be able to get close. Unfortunately, it was already too late by the time Long realized this. Guangming's warhammer had already struck out. With the addition of Guangming's divine power, Guangming's warhammer was several times larger than before. Boom! Guangming's warhammer struck the totem poles. The dimensional door emitted an intense light. Immediately after, the space surged and the earth began to shake. Boom! Rumble! The totem poles began to collapse. The dimensional door's power gradually weakened. Countless bolts of lightning flew into the air, forming a beautiful scene. Success! Ron, Shea, and Cronia saw this and were both surprised and delighted. However, the three of them looked at Gray with complicated expressions. That's right, Gray had indeed destroyed the dimensional door and blocked the Orc Frost Wolf Legion's continuous reinforcements. This was indeed beneficial to Ron and the others, but was there such a good thing in the world? What was the goal of the Holy Light Angel Legion? What was their goal in spending so much effort to destroy the dimensional door? Ron could figure it out even if he used his toes to think. Perhaps they had set their sights on the Forgotten City. They wanted to replace the Orcs' position in the undead main plane. If this was really the case, it wouldn't be a good thing for the undead. It was just that the ones controlling the undead's fate had changed from the Orcs to the angels. The undead's fate hadn't changed at all. Roar! Long let out a howl of despair. At this moment, the Orc soldiers were at their lowest. Haha! Gray laughed loudly. His face was filled with pride and insanity. Ugly, lowly Orcs, you're done for. The Frostwolf army is done for. Rumble. No matter how powerful you are, you won't be able to turn this around. You have lost. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. Long's eyes turned blood red, and his murderous intent burned like flames in the sky. He raised his long sword, and a powerful divine power flashed in the blade. His tall body suddenly leaped and pounced on Gray. Haha, you want to kill me? Unfortunately, it's too late. A cold smile appeared on Gray's face. He held a scroll in his hand and slowly tore it open. Teleportation scroll. Gray used the teleportation scroll. The spatial energy of the teleportation scroll wrapped around him. At this moment, Long's figure appeared above him. Gray could clearly feel the chill of the blade on his forehead. Gray still had a smile on his face. However, he was extremely nervous at this moment. His palms were covered in cold sweat. Whoosh! At the last moment, Gray's figure disappeared into the horizon. Although Long was fast, he was still one step too late. Gray. A bitter smile appeared on Alice's face. From the beginning to the end, Gray didn't even look at her. At this moment, she was extremely disappointed in Gray. Scenes of her time with Gray appeared in Alice's mind. The two of them fell in love, and learned from each other. Gray was the captain, and she was the vice captain. The two of them cooperated well and were very close. But, Gray, did you know? My strength has long surpassed yours. But I know your pride. In order to protect your fragile self-esteem, I chose to hide my strength. Alice thought. 2 lines of tears slowly flowed down her cheeks. You despicable angels. I will kill you all. I will kill all of you. With the dimensional gate destroyed, Lung was so angry that he was about to go mad. He strode towards Alice. He was going to kill her. That's right. Only by killing could the hatred and humiliation in Long's heart lessen. This time, Long raised his butcher's knife against the defenseless Alice, in front of this powerful god. Alice, who only had the strength of a god, couldn't resist at all. She closed her eyes in despair. Lord Long, be careful. Long's long sword was about to slash down. He could almost see the pitiful female angel in front of him being cut in half. He could even smell the pungent smell of blood. However, at this moment, the voice of an orc soldier sounded in his ears. A trace of the light of a divine weapon appeared in front of Long. It carried a powerful cold aura. It was as if winter had suddenly arrived. Boom! The long sword and the sharp sword collided. An earth-shattering aura erupted. It swept through the surroundings like a hurricane. Caught off guard, Long took a step back. The person who came was Shea. She put all her strength into this attack. But it only made Long take a step back. What? An undead? A human? The moment he saw Shea, Long's eyes showed a trace of surprise. He didn't expect that there would be another group of people besides the angels of the Holy Light Legion who had designs on the spatial gate. He didn't even know the identity of the other party. A human who cultivated the power of the undead. At this moment, Shea had already pulled Alice onto the back of the nightmare beast. She turned around and ran. You still want to run? An undead, Long said coldly. He had nowhere to vent his killing intent. Shea had saved the person he wanted to kill. This made his heart even angrier. The Holy Light Legion was one thing, but you, an undead who cultivated from human, actually dare to shit on the heads of orcs? An undead? What I hate the most are undead. Just as Long was about to make a move on Shea, he didn't expect to be surrounded by strong enemies. An enemy who wasn't weaker than himself was staring at him. Chapter 867. Death's Hand. Ron coldly snorted. The divine power of death surrounded his body, and his black eyes turned green. His feet slowly left the ground, and the dragon bone staff in his hand turned into the Calamity God staff. Vast and strange divine power of death filled the entire space. A huge hand grabbed at Long, and the surrounding ghosts let out mournful cries. The terrifying death energy passed through the void, and the powerful pressure caused even the souls of the orcs to tremble. What? Death energy? Long was shocked, and his hair stood on end. Since when did the undead have such a powerful hero? Or a god? Berserk Meteor Slash. The opponent's powerful strength made him feel like he could smell death. Long did not dare to be careless. His long sword turned into a ray of light, as bright as a meteor in the night sky. Boom! The collision of the two divine powers caused the entire Forgotten City to shake. The orcs were all thrown off their feet, and those who were close to them were killed on the spot. The long sword in Long's hand was a god-tier weapon called the Bloodthirsty Blade, combined with his powerful beast god power. Even the ground was cut open like a spider web. Even though he was stronger than Ron, he felt a strong vibration from the bloodthirsty blade in his hand. His heart could not help but sink. The opponent was very strong. Run! Just as Shea was at a loss, Ron's voice sounded in her mind. She did not dare to be careless, and immediately jumped up the city wall on her nightmare beast. This unicorn demon horse had anti-gravity skills, and it ran up the city wall like it was flat ground. After it reached the top of the city wall, it suddenly jumped up high. "Hold my hand." Shea looked up and saw Ron's face in the air. There was no blame in his eyes, only deep concern. Shea's heart warmed. She reached out and tightly held Ron's hand. "Don't even think about escaping." Long was completely enraged. The spatial gate had been destroyed, and the angel he wanted to kill had been saved. If he let these useless undead escape in front of him, how could he let them escape? This was a major blow to Long's prestige. Whirlwind of blades. In a fit of rage, Long attacked. His first attack was his most powerful skill. Countless saber images swept out from Ron's side, and a whirlwind appeared in the Forgotten City. It sounded like the roar of a beast, and it was like a tornado. It carried the powerful beast god's power and blasted towards Ron. When Ron blasted towards Ron with a thunderous force, he casually glanced around and saw something familiar. It was the weapon in Ron's hand. "What is this?" Long couldn't help but stare blankly. The gigantic skull slowly appeared in his eyes. The familiar aura of death and the thing that was constantly rotating. All of these converged into a magnificent image in his eyes. On the boundless prairie, the undead were marching like ants. They charged, roared, and bravely faced the continuous artillery fire. Forward and forward. In the sky above the great army, there was a powerful figure, an undying war spirit, a great name. In his hand, there was this strange weapon. Is it him? Seeing the Calamity God staff, Long was clearly stunned. His skill also showed a trace of stagnation, and his aura became scattered. At this moment, Ron saw an opportunity. Cronia. Facing Long's stormy attacks, Ron was very calm. He called out to Cronia. "I'm here." Cronia appeared from the shadows. "Let's go." Ron pulled Shea with one hand and Cronia with the other. His figure slowly turned into a black fog, and with a pung, they disappeared into the boundless night. Only Long's angry roar could be heard in the night sky. Night Crow Forest, located in the northeast of the Forgotten City. At night, the Night Crow Forest would occasionally be heard, and it seemed very lively. However, today's Night Crow Forest was different from usual. Silence, a deathly silence. If one looked carefully on the ground covered with thick leaves, there were corpses of crows lying on the ground. These corpses seemed to have been burned by something and had already turned into charcoal. In the depths of a Night Crow Forest, there was a large camp, and it was an endless camp. A male angel silently stood on a small slope. From this place, one could see the Forgotten City in the distance. This male angel had golden hair, blue pupils, sword-like eyebrows, and starry eyes. He had a pair of golden wings on his back, and they were gently flapping, making him look extraordinarily mighty. His name was John, and he was a high-level male angel with powerful, Guaming divine power. He stood like this, his deep eyes revealing a pondering expression. In the tent behind him, there was the symbol of the Holy Light Angel Corps embroidered. At this moment, a voice broke his train of thought. Lord John, Lord John." An angel flapped his wings and flew over. "What is it?" That male angel called John shrugged his shoulders and asked without turning his head. "Gray has returned. He brought the latest news from the Forgotten City." That angel hurriedly said, "What?" John stared blankly, then became overjoyed. "Immediately call him to see me." Hua, hua, hua. The nightmare beast spread out its 4 hooves, galloping on the boundless grassland. Its 4 strong limbs crossed the stream, creating beautiful splashes. There were 3 people riding on the nightmare beast's back. Besides Shea and Ron, there was also Alice, who had just been saved from Long. However, the nightmare beast's strength clearly couldn't support the weight of the 3 people, and its speed clearly slowed down. Finally, the nightmare beast couldn't support it any longer and fell to the ground with a thump. The 3 people fell heavily from the horse's back, falling to the ground with their mouths full of mud. Huff! Huff! Ron and Shea stood up with difficulty, bending over and gasping for breath. Alice also fell heavily, but at this moment, she didn't seem to feel anything. She quietly lay on the ground, staring blankly at the sky, as if she had lost her soul. "Are you all right?" The thief Cronia appeared from the shadows and asked with concern. Shea and Ron shook their heads, indicating that they were fine. Cronia patted her chest with lingering fear. "We finally escaped. It was really dangerous just now. We did escape, but my identity was exposed." Ron couldn't help but smile bitterly. At that time, he had acted subconsciously, not knowing whether it was a blessing or a curse. Long might not know his identity, but it was impossible for the Calamity God's staff to not recognize him. "Who told you to meddle in other people's business?" Cronia grumbled, pointing at Alice. "If not for saving her, we would have escaped long ago." Ron smiled bitterly. At that time, he saw Shea rushing forward, so he took action. Long's strength was too strong, and Shea would have lost her life if she wasn't careful. With Ron's character, he definitely wouldn't leave her in the lurch. Shea's mouth twitched, as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say it. "I'm sorry." "Forget it." Ron waved his hand magnanimously. "Sometimes, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have your identity exposed." Shea looked at Ron gratefully. She knew that Ron said that to comfort her, but Shea didn't know why she had rushed forward in the heat of the moment. Thinking about it later, she still felt a little scared. "Why did you save me? Wouldn't it be better to let me die?" At this time, a faint voice sounded in Ron's ears. He saw Alice lying quietly on the ground, looking helplessly at the sky through the void. There was no trace of life on her face. "Bah, you think we wanted to save you?" When Cronia saw Alice's appearance, she became even angrier. "If it weren't for Sir Shaya's benevolence and couldn't bear to see you die in the hands of that orc, would you still be here talking?" "Umph." Alice's stubborn temper flared up at Cronia's words. She sat up and shouted, "Who wants you to save me? Who wants you to save me? Damned undead. Huh? You're actually scolding me." Cronia opened her eyes wide and said with her hands on her waist, Look, Lord Lich King, look at the people you've saved, what?" Alice was stunned when she heard that. She looked at Ron from head to toe. "Did I hear wrong? Lich King? You're the Lich King?" Cronia was stunned. Only then did she remember that she had let it slip. Her eyes immediately revealed an ominous glint. "Lord Lich King, do you want me to kill her?" "Kill me?" Alice sneered. "With just the two of you? All right, let me see how you're going to kill me. Lowly undead." Shea looked at Cronia and then at Alice. She knew that this was all her fault. She had no choice but to look at Ron for help. "Forget it." Ron had no choice but to tell Alice his identity. In any case, his identity had already been exposed. It wouldn't matter if one more person knew. His intuition told him that Alice wasn't a bad person. "I'm not the Lich King. I'm only the successor of the Lich King." Ron sighed. "Alice. I don't know if Alice is your original name. I guess I'll just call you that." Ron raised his head and looked straight into Alice's eyes. At this moment, Alice was in a very sorry state. Her armor was shattered, her body was covered in wounds, and one of her pure white wings was broken. However, her head held high still carried an unyielding arrogance. "You can tell my identity to the other angels. This is your right. Perhaps you'll receive a generous reward. However, this has nothing to do with us. We're leaving now. This is medicine for you. It can heal your injuries." After saying that, Ron gave Shea a look. Shea understood and took out some healing potions from her spatial ring and placed them on the ground. Seeing Ron's actions, Cronia could only resentfully put away the dagger she had taken out. Alice didn't say anything. She tightly clenched her fists, her delicate body faintly trembling. "Let's go." Ron glanced at Alice and called out to Shea and Cronia before turning to leave. "Wait." At this moment, Alice finally spoke. She called out to Ron's group. Ron's group stopped and looked at her in confusion. Chapter 868. Long stood on top of the Forgotten City's high walls, his eyes looking into the distance. The sky was already slightly bright, and the light shone on his sharp fangs, emitting a cold light. Is it really him? Thinking of that imposing and terrifying figure, Long could not help but shudder. No, he's already dead. The guy with the weapon is a human. Although he's very strong, it's definitely not him. But what does this human have to do with him? Long thought to himself. If he knew what he had done in the undead main plane, even if he died 10 times over, he would not be able to escape. As someone who had participated in the war 100,000 years ago, Long deeply understood the terror of the Scourge army. Although the Scourge army had now declined, if that man was still around, it was hard to say what would happen in the future. Perhaps the human was not him, but his successor. If that was the case, then the Scourge staff would not be difficult to explain. Long finally figured out some of the key points, but now there were more important things waiting for him. At this time, an orc quickly walked up the ladder on the city wall. Reporting to Lord Long, we found traces of a large number of angels in the Night Crow Forest. We believe it's the Holy Light Angel Army from the main plane of order. Night Crow Forest, they're actually lying in ambush here. At this time, Long recovered from his deep thoughts and paced with his hands behind his back. He had no choice but to put the matter of the Scourge staff aside, because the Holy Light Angel Army's swords were already pointed at his nose. These angels have nothing better to do, daring to set their sights on us? As one of the strongest forces in the evil faction, the orc's pride was no less than the arrogant angels. Long's eyes were filled with a strong murderous intent, and he sneered. Hee, although you've destroyed the spatial door. What you didn't expect was, I'm here. I'm here. This sentence was enough to show Long's confidence. As the highest leader of the Frostwolf army, his arrival naturally had a huge impact. Although the spatial door had been destroyed, it was not difficult to repair it. It just needed time, but would the Holy Light Angel Army give him time? Definitely not. Long was almost certain that after the angel escaped, they would attack immediately. If that was the case, that this time, another orc ran up the city wall. Reporting to Lord Long, the Holy Light Angel Army has left the Night Crow Forest and is charging towards the Forgotten City. What? When Long heard this, he immediately clenched his teeth in anger. These angels came so quickly. Angels were high-level creatures. They had wings and could move very quickly. This was also why the angels in the main plane of order were so powerful. Their legion of holy angels and Holy Light Angel Corps were second to none. In the evil faction, the only ones who were as famous as the angels were the demons from the main plane of hell. Pass down my order. Gather all the armies and fight the Holy Light Angel Army. There was no time to think, so Lung decisively gave the order. Boom! 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 The sky had just begun to brighten, and, on the boundless plains, dust filled the air. Under the leadership of Archangel John, the Holy Light Angel Corps gathered 80,000 angels and 260,000 ground troops and charged towards the Forgotten City, which was under the control of the orcs. The battle for the Forgotten City had officially begun. This was the first step for the forces from the main plane of order to forcefully enter the main plane of the undead. The Holy Light Angel Corps Emily was determined to win. Although they sent fewer troops than the orcs, they were all elite troops who had participated in many battles. After the Forgotten City spatial gate was destroyed by Grey, all connections to the main plane of power had been completely cut off. Long knew very well that if this battle failed, the 500,000 orcs in the Forgotten City would have nowhere to go. Long stood on the high city wall of the Forgotten City and looked into the distance with cold eyes. Suddenly, a large black cloud appeared in the sky and pressed down on the Forgotten City with the power of thunder. Angels! Those are angels! Oh my God! So many angels! I swear, I've never seen so many angels in my life. Defend! Defend, everyone! Get ready for battle! Clang! 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 The orc army was still well trained. Although they had suffered a small setback, Long had already made preparations. The army had already been stationed in the Forgotten City, and most importantly, Long had personally come. Just by standing on the city walls, he had completely solidified the orcs' confidence. The alarm bell had been rung. All the orcs in the Forgotten City moved. However, the millions of undead living in the Forgotten City were at a loss. Many people didn't even know what was going on. The Holy Light Angel Corps had the most powerful air force. These high-level creatures with flapping wings were the most powerful warriors from birth. Closer, closer. The orcs, and even the beautiful feathers of the angels in the sky, as well as the exquisite and gorgeous magic full-body armor. Release, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Following the command of the orc commander, countless orc arrow towers roared angrily. The orc arrow towers that occupied the best shooting positions on the city wall shot out sharp arrows that were as thick as spears and scattered into the sky like raindrops. Holy light defense. The angel commander waved the weapon in his hand. Vast Guangming power spread out and reflected the light of the angel's armor, forming white runes. Clang, clang, clang. The orcs' arrows hit the angel's defense. It was as if they had hit hard steel and bounced off. Other than a few unlucky ones, there were basically no casualties. At this time, the Angel Corps had already charged toward the city wall. They used their natural ability to fly and didn't even need to attack the city. They just directly landed. Kill. Long's eyes were blood red. He held the divine weapon, Bloodthirst Blade, and leaped high like a fierce beast. The long sword in his hand turned into a bright light and attacked the angel closest to him. Long was very fast. The angel didn't even have time to react. He only saw a white light appear in front of him, swoosh, blood splattered everywhere. The angel's face twisted in pain. Only then did he realize that his body had been completely separated from his body. One move. Using only one move to kill an angel from the divine realm. Long. He was worthy of the title of hero. Long live. The orcs cheered. They looked at Long with eyes full of passion. Clang, 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 kill, kill, kill. The giant drums on the Kodo's back were beaten. The orcs' fighting spirit was completely ignited. They panted heavily and stared at the angels descending from the sky with bloodshot eyes. Chapter 869. Long quickly killed his way into the group of angels, the long sword in his hand dancing like a wheel. Every time the sword flashed, an angel would scream and fall to the ground. Quick, surround and kill him. He's the hero of the orcs. An angel screamed. Under that angel's guidance, the surrounding angels quickly closed in on Long. You want to surround me with just you? Long's eyes flashed fiercely. At this moment, his body suddenly emitted a beam of orange light. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Long's body split into three. Soon, three identical Long appeared in front of the angels. Each of these clones had powerful combat strength. Not good, it's a clone technique. Not good. The angels screamed. Long, who had split into three, was even more ferocious. He was like a tiger in a flock of sheep, wantonly slaughtering them. The blood and feathers of the angels fell to the ground. None of the angels could stop Long. At this moment, he was like a ferocious beast, killing in and out of the group of angels as he pleased. Of course, except for him, John. This was the vice archangel of the Holy Light Angel Corps. He had always been Emily's assistant. Although he was not as powerful as Emily, he was still a godlike existence. At this moment, he slowly revealed himself in the group of angels. His golden wings flapped gently behind him. Bathed in the morning light, he looked like a god descending. At this moment, he slowly raised his hands to the sky with a pious expression on his face. He softly sang, God, your love reaches the heavens, your righteousness lasts forever, God. Among the gods, no one can compare to you. Your deeds are unmatched, God. Your teachings will rise and scatter your enemies. Only the believers will be happy, God. Your teachings will rise and scatter your enemies. May your kingdom descend upon this land. Turn all evil into nothingness. Boom, boom, boom. At that moment, the sky seemed to split open. Rays of light shone down, and the vast divine power of Guangming filled the entire world at that moment. All the angels began to chant in unison. Their expressions were extremely pious. God, may your kingdom descend. Destroy all evil. Boom, boom, boom. With the blessing of the holy light, the fighting spirit of the angels rose to the highest point. They chanted hymns as they pounced on the orcs one after another, At this time, the orc shamans also began to chant. They spoke loudly in a language that no one could understand. They danced with their hands raised high, and a red glow appeared on their hands. Bloodthirsty frenzy. Roar, roar, roar. As they roared, the beastmen's eyes turned red. Their attack power, defense, speed, and morale increased. Every beastman's strength almost doubled. These were the orc shaman priests. Although they were not the most powerful combat profession, they were the most powerful support profession. When an army had a shaman priest, any army would be afraid to fight against them. At this time, the Holy Light Angel Corps' ground troops arrived at the city walls. They were divided into 7 groups, and each group attacked a gate. These ground troops were mainly made up of paladins, holy crossbowmen, priests, unicorn knights, holy crusade knights, siege chariots, and other types of troops. All of them were wearing beautiful and exquisite armor and had great strength. Under the cover of the Angel Corps, these ground troops began to attack the city. 1, 2, 3. Boom! The siege chariots extended large iron pillars and fiercely slammed into the Forgotten City's gate. With just one hit, a crack appeared on the Forgotten City's gate. A commander of the Holy Light Angel Corps loudly shouted, "Well done, guys. Let's go again. Retreat 1, 2, 3. Ram, boom, boom, boom." The siege chariots rammed into the Forgotten City's gate a few times, and finally, it collapsed, with the Angel Corps holding back the orcs' main force. The ground troops quickly broke through. This was the strategy that John had come up with early on. Teamwork, order, and order were the principles of the order plane. Even war followed this principle. The city's broken. The city's broken. Kill. Finally, one of the Angel Corps broke through the gate and charged into the city like a whirlwind, fighting with the orc army. Long, John. As their eyes met, Long and John finally found their opponents. Long laughed coldly and gave up on the half-dead angel that he had beaten up. He strode forward, and John fearlessly faced him. This was a showdown between heroes, a clash between the primary plane of order and the primary plane of power. Boom! Bloodthirsty saber and Angel's sword collided. Guangming's divine power and the orc god's power erupted at the same time, and it was like a huge wave in the ocean. The Forgotten City's gate collapsed in the fierce battle. Hey, look! After escaping the Forgotten City, Ron, Shea, Cronia, and Alice stood on a tall mountain range. They could see the small Forgotten City from here. Cronia pointed at the Forgotten City in the distance and said loudly, "It's the angels. It's the Angel Corps. They're fighting with the orcs." "That's right." Ron nodded. He looked at the angels flying in the sky, and a trace of shock appeared on his face. The Angel Corps really lives up to their name. The angels were indeed high-level creatures favored by the gods. They seemed to have all the advantages of the world's creatures. They had strong defense, beautiful magic, wings that could fly, powerful strength, and handsome appearances. It could be said that they were the most perfect creatures created by the gods. They were born with everything that made other creatures pale in comparison. Ron didn't have any good feelings towards the orcs, but he couldn't feel happy at all when he saw the angels attacking the Forgotten City. This was the undead's territory, but they didn't have any right to decide their own territory. The orcs and the angels were fighting, but the undead, as the masters, were completely uninvolved. This was a disgrace to all undead. Ron tightly clenched his fists, his fingernails almost sinking into his flesh. Once upon a time, the powerful undead had been reduced to such a state. At this moment, Ron suddenly understood the Lich King's painstaking efforts. "I must make the undead strong again." Ron secretly swore in his heart. Shea turned to look at Alice, only to see her quietly standing there with a complicated expression on her face. How could Alice not recognize her own corps? Calculating the time, the Angel Corps should have started attacking by now. As long as she was willing, she could go back with just a single step. But did she want to go back? That was the cold and emotionless order plane. There was only life and death, order and obedience. Apart from the will of the gods, there was no room for personal thought. There, she wasn't a life, but a tool that could be sacrificed for the mission. In this mortal plane, was this holy light angel legion still worthy of his loyalty? And that gray. Thinking of gray, Alice immediately lost interest in going back. She silently sighed. Chapter 870. The four of them headed west. Alice folded her wings and hid them behind her back. She then covered herself with thick armor, making it impossible to see from the outside. About 7 to 8 hours later, they arrived at an undead market. In the market, apart from Shea, Ron, Cronia, and Alice each bought an undead horse. With the horses, their speed was obviously much faster. They took only 3 days to reach the spider forest. The dense spider forest was like a giant beast in front of them, its huge mouth wide open as if it was about to devour them. As it was close to evening, this place seemed even more sinister. We've arrived at the spider forest. Cronia reined in the horse's head, her expression grave. But there's no path ahead. Shea frowned. Why? Because the spider forest is a forbidden place. Ever since the spider empress Lol fled here after being defeated, this place has basically become a dead zone. No one has ever entered this place. Cronia said calmly. The map was drawn by humans. A place that no one had entered naturally wouldn't have a path marked on the map. The spider forest is merely the surface of the spider kingdom. The true face of the spider kingdom lies in the enormous underground palace beneath the spider forest, Cronia sighed. It's not easy to find the entrance to the underground palace. We can only try our luck. If what Mr. Zilio said is true, the spider empress Lolth will definitely help us. As long as there's a trace of possibility, we have to work 100 times harder. Ron nodded with a sullen expression and said resolutely, I must find the spider empress Lolth. Alice frowned. I feel disgusted by this place. Don't go in if you're afraid of death. Cronia snorted coldly. She didn't have a good impression of the angel. These days, the two of them had been back and forth, sparring with words countless times. If it weren't for Ron suppressing the two of them, they would probably have fought. Ew. Alice was instantly enraged when she heard that. She sneered. Hee, who's afraid of death? A person who doesn't dare to fight head-on and only dares to use despicable sneak attacks. If you have the guts, let's duel. Let's duel then. Cronia's anger surged. Come on. Alice didn't want to be outdone. Done. Ron stopped Cronia's provocation and turned to Alice, calmly saying, Alice, if you are not willing to go in with us, you can leave now. I have a premonition that there is great danger lurking ahead. Although we saved you from the orcs, we have no right to ask you to take the risk with us. In the end, this is the matter of us undead. Alice was stunned. She had never heard anyone speak in a negotiating tone. In the main plane of order, it was either an order or an order. Everything was carried out according to strict rules. Ever since she followed Ron and the others, Alice had learned a new word, freedom. Isn't it just a few spiders? Alice smiled. If you're not afraid, why should I be? Since you're not afraid, then follow me. Ron muttered. He wasn't worried about Alice's strength. He was worried that if he brought an angel in, she would misunderstand. However, along the way, Alice had unknowingly become their companion. Since Alice insisted, Ron couldn't refuse. Ron and the others led the horses into the spider forest. Dark, gloomy, and quiet. This was Ron's first impression of the spider forest. Instead of calling it a forest, it was more like a land of death. There were no birds chirping, no insects chirping, and no signs of any living creatures. It didn't have anything that a forest should have. Hiss, hiss, the undead horse snorted uneasily and kept retreating as if it felt fear ahead. Something's not right. Cronia's ears perked up. It's too quiet here. It's so quiet that it's scary. Everyone, be careful, Ron said in a low voice. It was easier said than done to find an entrance to the underground palace in this huge forest, but Ron wouldn't give up. After a round of comforting, the undead horse finally calmed down. Shaya stood in front with a longsword in one hand and a shield in the other, ready to deal with unexpected situations at any time. Alice also took out her weapon and armor and stood guard at the back. The two of them, one in the front and one in the back, surrounded Ron and Cronia in the middle. This was the best position for an adventurer team. The four of them walked for more than an hour, and the sky was completely dark. In the huge spider forest, they couldn't even see their own fingers. Alice somehow conjured a ball of light, and in an instant, the eyes of the four of them lit up. Not bad. Ron looked at Alice approvingly. He had to admit that Guangming's strength was very strong. Rustle, 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 rustle. At this moment, the leaves in the forest moved for some reason, and Ron stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" Shea asked. "Something's not right." Ron's vigilant eyes scanned the surroundings. "I think I heard something. I think I heard it too." Cronia's ears twitched. "It seems to be the wind." "No, there's no wind." Ron's expression slowly changed. He used his soul power to communicate with the crow, and through the eyes of the crow, he saw a large white thing in front of them. That was a spider web. By the time Ron understood, it was already too late. The flying crow had already crashed into the spider web. "Everyone, be careful." Ron's expression changed greatly, and everyone's hearts tightened. Katja! The large tree behind them suddenly broke and smashed toward the four of them. Alice coldly snorted, and her long sword turned into a white ray of light. Boom! The large tree broke into two. Immediately after, a large and sinister skull suddenly stretched out, scaring Alice and causing her to scream. This huge monster had a large skull-like head and a large and bloated body. It had 6 large legs that supported itself on the ground, and 2 razor-sharp claws in front of it. Goo! The gigantic monster let out a strange cry and suddenly leaped high into the air, viciously biting at Alice. "Be careful, it's a crypt spider," Cronia cried out in alarm. At this moment, the crypt spider had already bitten the long sword in Alice's hand. "Bastard!" Alice angrily shouted, and her strength suddenly erupted. She flipped over and fiercely threw the crypt spider to the ground. "Go to hell." Alice's martial arts were powerful, and with a backhand, she stabbed at the crypt spider. "Don't kill it," Ron shouted, but unfortunately it was too late. Alice's long sword had already pierced the crypt spider's abdomen, and disgusting blood flowed all over the ground like pus. Ugh! Ron originally wanted to stop her. After all, his original intention was to seek cooperation, not to kill. Now that Alice had made the first move, the situation was very difficult to salvage. Goo! 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 However, the development of the situation was not what Ron had expected. At this moment, in the huge spider forest, crypt spiders poked their heads out of the forest, and there were thousands of them. Their bodies were as big as elephants, and the small ones were as big as bison. All of them had sinister skulls with deep fangs in their mouths, and disgusting saliva slowly flowed to the ground. They stared at the prey in front of them, and cheerfully cried out, "Goo! Goo, so many!" Ron took a step back, his face aghast. Thousands of crypt spiders gathered together, and the sight of it made one's scalp tingle. The key was that these thousands of crypt spiders could still be seen, and there were countless crypt spiders hidden in the forest. "Ron, what do we do now?" Cronia asked as they were surrounded in the middle, standing back to back. "Are they intelligent creatures? Or are they exotic beasts?" Ron asked, and there was a hint of nervousness in his tone. "They are living creatures, not exotic beasts," Cronia said with certainty. "But it said that these guys don't have high intelligence. Can we communicate with them?" Alice asked with a trembling voice. She was most afraid of these disgusting bugs, and this was also the reason why she had overreacted earlier. "I don't know, but let's try." Ron took a deep breath and calmed himself down. "Everyone, don't make a move. Don't make a move," Ron calmed down and said with a smile. "Everyone, we don't have any evil intentions. We are the undead from Hakant, and we have something to discuss with your queen. I think you should be able to lead us to her, right?" Roar! A low roar suddenly came from the dense forest, and then all the crypt spiders calmed down. At this time, a spider several times larger than an ordinary crypt spider slowly crawled out from the group. He was the leader of this group of spiders, the Crypt Spider King. The Crypt Spider King growled a few times. He tilted his head, and his blood-red eyes looked at Ron and the others. His nose twitched as if he was sniffing something. This should be their leader, Ron thought. He pressed his hand down and said to the Crypt Spider King, "Listen, I'm looking for your Empress. It's something very important, roar." The Crypt Spider King growled and interrupted Ron's words. He said vaguely, "Scram, this place does not welcome undead." What? Although the Spider King's words were intermittent, Ron still heard it clearly. However, he did not understand why the Spider Forest did not welcome the undead. Were they not allies? Ron was not willing to go back like this. His mission was not completed yet. He took a step forward. "Listen to me." This roar, the Crypt Spider King growled. This time, there was a fierce glint in his eyes. Even the surrounding crypt spiders looked unfriendly. This was his last warning. "Don't worry about him. Even if we kill our way in, what can they do?" Shea snorted and said. She had already seen that the Crypt Spider King was only in the realm of the gods. It would be easy to kill him. Roar. Chapter 871. The Crypt Spider King made its move. It let out a strange cry and opened its mouth, releasing countless skeleton-like spirits. These strange skeletons flew and howled, letting out mournful cries. "Be careful, it's a soul attack." Ron's heart tightened as he shouted. Although these skeletons wouldn't harm the body, they would attack the soul. When thousands of crypt spiders released these strange souls, one only needed to think to know how terrifying they were. Boom! Ron opened his hand and a faint green flame shot out, burning the spirits to ashes. "Quick, let's kill our way out." Kill. At this time, Shea, Cronia, and Alice had nothing to worry about. They waved their weapons and charged at the crypt spiders in front of them. Kill! 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 At this time, Ron's undead horse let out a miserable cry. One of the crypt spiders had bitten off its neck. Then the other crypt spiders swarmed over and instantly tore the undead horse into pieces. Cronia and Alice's horses were also killed. Hiss! At this time, the Crypt Spider King spat out a white substance from its mouth and shot it at Ron and the others. "Be careful, it's spider silk," Cronia warned. The dagger in her hand emitted a cold light and instantly cut the spider silk in half. Although these spider webs looked extremely soft, they were abnormally tough. Even a sharp sword would have a hard time cutting through them. Most importantly, these spider webs carried a powerful paralyzing poison. Once entangled, one would be unable to move. Hiss! 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 More and more spider silk was shot out. The thousands of crypt spiders shot out densely like raindrops. Soon, a white sea formed around Ron. The spider silk stuck to his body and was extremely sticky. Ron's movements were obviously slowed down. "Purify!" At this time, Alice shouted. She raised the long sword in her hand, and a powerful light flashed from the tip of the sword. It was as bright as the sun. When the spider silk came into contact with the light, it was as if it had come into contact with flames and instantly melted. Purify was one of the angel's ultimate skills. It could purify all evil and eliminate any negative effects. "Well done, Alice," just like that, Ron shouted. At this time, there was no longer any spider web around him. "Restrain him first." Shea's gaze was fixed on the Crypt Spider King. She rode her nightmare beast and charged forward, leaving behind crypt spider corpses everywhere she went. "Coo! Coo! Coo!" The Crypt Spider King panicked. It didn't expect its opponent to be so powerful. It retreated while commanding the crypt spiders to surround it. Ron and the others didn't dare to continue fighting. As they fought, they quickly broke through. Soon, they arrived at an open space. At this time, the entire spider forest was in chaos. Countless crypt spiders gushed out like a fountain. These creatures that were born with the ability to burrow crawled out from the ground one after another, forming a sea of spiders around Ron. So many crypt spiders. Ron and the others were stunned. They had never seen so many crypt spiders before. One after another, they formed a black cloud. It was a disgusting and horrifying sight. "Coo!" The Crypt Spider King made a few strange sounds. At this time, it opened its huge mouth. In an instant, countless spider webs covered the sky and attacked. Alice, quickly get rid of them. Cronia panicked. These spider webs had already affected her movements. The ground was covered in a thick layer of them. She, who was usually agile, had difficulty moving. No, there are too many. I can't get rid of them. Alice screamed in horror. No one would be able to stand these disgusting and sticky spider webs on their body. Let's get out of here first. Shea used her sword to cut the spider webs, but there were too many of them. She couldn't cut them all. Ron finally understood the horror of the human wave tactic. In such a huge sea of spiders, even if he was a god, he was powerless. The skeletons he summoned were entangled by the spider webs and couldn't fight. The frost WYRM he summoned couldn't fly into the sky at all. The spider webs that the cave spiders shot out formed a dense spider web in the sky, and even the frost WYRM was pulled down from the sky. Unless there was a strong army, there was no way to enter the spider forest. Not to mention entering the underground spider kingdom. They might even lose their lives here. Retreat immediately. Don't get entangled with them. Ron calmly gave the order. At this point, he had basically given up on the idea of forming an alliance with the Spider Queen. Perhaps she didn't even have such an idea. The difference in strength between them was too great. Yes, Shea nodded and immediately turned back to fight. She never doubted Ron's orders. It wasn't that easy to escape. At this moment, the area around Ron had turned into a sea of spiders. Countless spiders continuously surged out from the ground. There were more than 100,000 of them. Although these crypt spiders were weak individually and didn't have strong defenses, their long-range attacks and spider webs were perfect. Alice let out a scream. With a swoosh, 2 white wings spread out from her back and transformed into her angel form. She flapped her wings in horror, tried to escape in the air, but she was tightly entangled by a large net in the air, unable to move. At this moment, Ron was already regretting. The danger of this trip to the spider forest was far beyond his imagination. Perhaps these crypt spiders weren't difficult to deal with, but there were too few of them. If he had an army, boom. At this moment, Ron suddenly felt his feet become light. Half of his body had already sunk in. Not good. There's a trap. Ron's expression changed. Careless, too careless. Why didn't the crypt spiders who love to dig holes dig a trap in their path? Perhaps there were more traps waiting for them in the direction they were heading. Ron, Lord Lich King, Shea, and Cronia screamed. Shea wanted to pull him back, but Cronia was faster. She rushed to Ron's side and suddenly laid on the ground, grabbing Ron's arm. Ron's downward momentum was stopped. Shea sighed in relief. Ron was about to thank Cronia when he suddenly felt his hand become lighter. Cronia's body slid down with Ron. Ron! Shaya crazily rushed to the edge of the trap and fiercely pounced, but he grabbed empty air and rolled down together with himself. Sha! 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 Chapter 872. Woo! Ron struggled for a while, but realized that he couldn't move at all. The paralyzing poison on the spider silk had already seeped into his body. Other than his eyeballs, he couldn't move his entire body, but his mind was still very clear. The bottom of the cave was very deep and connected to many exits. It was like a maze. Even if Ron could move freely, he probably wouldn't be able to walk out of this huge and complicated underground world. It was no wonder that Spider Queen Lolth chose to hide here after the Scourge Army's defeat. This was indeed an excellent place to hide. Even an army wouldn't be able to take it down easily. The huge underground world was the best shelter. Coo! 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 At this moment, the Crypt Spider King that was dragging Ron cried out a few times. Then, Ron felt his body turn and separate from the other 3. Ron panicked. Unfortunately, he couldn't say a word and couldn't move his body. He didn't know where he was being dragged to. Was he going to be eaten? He heard that crypt spiders love to eat their prey raw. Ron quickly calmed down and thought hard about how to escape. In terms of strength, this Crypt Spider King was definitely not Ron's match. It wasn't even a match for Shea, Alice, or Cronia. They relied on the spider silk with paralyzing poison and the terrifying and strange soul attack. Wait, soul attack? Yes, soul attack. Ron's heart lit up. Although he couldn't move his body now, his strength wasn't affected at all. Then, why didn't he directly attack that fellow's soul? Looking at the crypt spider king that was slowly moving in front of him, Ron's lips curled into an imperceptible smile. Coo! Coo! All right, let's stop here. The crypt spider king quickly dragged Ron into a relatively large cave. It turned its ugly and huge body around and grinned maliciously, preparing to enjoy its meal. Ron had been waiting for this moment. His gaze focused, and a faint green light appeared in his eyes. What? Caught off guard, the underground spider king's body trembled, as if it had been struck by lightning. Its huge body trembled like a sieve. The expression on the crypt spider king's face changed. It did not expect the other party to invade its soul. In just an instant, the prey had become the hunter. Under the pressure of Ron's powerful soul power, the crypt spider king's soul defense instantly collapsed. No, don't kill me. The crypt spider king had a pained expression on its face. It begged bitterly. It knew that as long as the other party was willing, he could take its life at any time. Let me go. A dignified voice rang out in the crypt spider king's mind. It was Ron giving the order. At this moment, the crypt spider king had completely become his slave. A trace of hesitation appeared on the crypt spider king's face. The intense pain from the depths of its soul quickly spread, making it wish it was dead. No, don't. I'll let you go. I'll let you go right now. The underground spider king squealed like a pig being slaughtered. Without hesitation, it extended its scissor-like claws and freed Ron from the dumpling. Huff! Huff! Ron took in large mouthfuls of fresh air. The soul attack just now seemed simple, but it consumed a lot of energy. However, with his soul power that far exceeded the other parties, he finally managed to control this fellow. Ron stood up and moved his slightly numb body. He looked at the crypt spider king lying on the ground like a docile kitten and snorted coldly. Where are the others? Where are they taken to? I don't know, the crypt spider king said with a trembling voice. I know, they're all locked up. The crypt spider king cried out in horror. Bring me to them immediately, Ron said coldly. The crypt spider king did not even dare to make a sound and let Ron sit on its back. After about 10 minutes, Ron finally rescued Shea and Shea. Are you all okay? Ron asked with a smile as he looked at the three who looked as if they had been reborn. We're fine. How did you escape? Shea asked as she moved her arms and legs. Ron smiled and did not answer Shea's question. He looked at the subdued crypt spiders around him and nodded slowly. These fellows were not strong individually, but when grouped together, they were extremely difficult to deal with. Ron had seen it firsthand. Ron sized up the crypt spider king for a few seconds and came up with an idea. You guys bring me to Spider Queen Lolth immediately. When the crypt spider king heard this, it was shocked. It stammered, what? You want to see Her Majesty the Queen? That's right. Ron nodded, his expression unquestionable. Once he said that, not only the crypt spider king, but even the normal crypt spiders beside it showed a look of horror. No, impossible, the crypt spider king said with a trembling voice. Even if it's me, I don't have the right to meet the Empress without her summoning me. She will kill me. Ron glared. If you don't bring us there, I will kill you right now. With their souls completely controlled, the crypt spider king and the other crypt spiders could not resist at all. They did not even have the right to say no. Okay, I'll go. A few crypt spiders carried Ron, Shea, Cronia, Alice, and the rest deeper underground. Ron and the rest used spider silk as camouflage. Although they encountered many crypt spiders along the way, fortunately, they did not reveal any flaws. After walking past a slope, Ron felt his eyes light up as he arrived at a spacious plaza. A winding underground river surrounded a magnificent underground palace. The walls of the palace were inlaid with a large number of gemstones. The light from these gemstones illuminated the entire hall. This is Her Majesty's palace, the crypt spider king said with a trembling voice. Sir, this is as far as I can bring you. Ron carefully sized up this majestic underground palace. The palace's defense was relatively lax. There were only 2 crypt spider kings guarding the entrance that was inlaid with gemstones. It was obvious that the Spider Empress was very confident in the defense of the Spider Kingdom. In fact, there was no force that could attack this place. "We're finally here." Ron smiled and pointed forward. He said to the Crypt Spider King, "Charge." "What?" The Crypt Spider King could not believe his ears. No matter how bold he was, he would not dare to charge into Her Majesty's palace. "I said charge," Ron shouted coldly in a low voice. His eyes turned green, and at the same time, he increased the power of soul control. The Crypt Spider King struggled, his ugly face showing a painful expression. "Stop! Who is it?" Just as Ron was about to control the Crypt Spider King completely, the 2 Crypt Spider Kings guarding the palace noticed Ron and the rest and shouted at the same time. "Do it!" Ron shouted. At this time, Shea, Cronia, and Alice rushed out like arrows. Swish, swish, swish. The heads of the 2 Crypt Spider Kings were chopped off in an instant, blood splattering everywhere. "Shea, quick! Open the door!" Zap, zap, zap! Shea shouted. Her tall body stood in front of the door. She pushed with both hands, and the heavy door was slowly pushed open. Enemy invasion. The door is being pushed open. Kill. At this time, the entire underground palace was alarmed. The crypt spiders who heard the commotion rushed out frantically. Kill. After entering the palace, there was a huge central hall. Ron waved his hand. Black gas spread and summoned a large number of undead creatures. Terranites, skeleton monarchs, and other high-level undead creatures appeared in the hall. Ron did not summon low-level skeletons. At this level of battle, low-level undead creatures were no longer of much use. Cuckoo! Protect Her Majesty! The crypt spiders cried out strangely and rushed out from all corners of the palace. They fought with Ron and the rest, and the entire hall was in chaos. Shea, Cronia, and Alice were not afraid. Under the cover of Ron's undead creatures, they fought with the crypt spiders. Rumble, rumble, rumble. At this time, the entire hall shook. Immediately after, a cold and strange aura came from afar. It was accompanied by a sharp cry. It's a god. Shea's expression changed slightly. She felt the immense power of the other party. Without a doubt, the other party was a true god. Rose, I can finally see her. Ron took a deep breath. He could not help but feel a faint sense of anticipation for this legendary hero who followed the Lich King Hermes and fought everywhere 100,000 years ago. Boom! At this time, the thick wall was suddenly knocked open. Debris flew everywhere. In an instant, a large blade-like arthropod leg reached out from the broken wall and stomped a Terranite into pieces. Immediately after, a low voice sounded from inside. Just from the tone, one could roughly guess the owner's anger. Damned undead, your provocations time and time again have made me lose my patience. Now you dare to trespass into my palace? Kiki, come, you will pay for your foolish actions. Amidst the low roar, a large body crossed the hall. 8 claws crawled on the ceiling and then slowly climbed down. At this time, Ron finally saw the true body of the Spider Queen. What entered Ron's eyes was a pale, extremely beautiful human female face. Exquisite, charming, noble, and cold. At this moment, her pink face was covered in frost and overflowing with killing intent. If one did not look at the terrifying spider body behind her, she would be a perfect human woman. Unfortunately, 8 large claws extended from her back. One end was like a sword piercing into the ground, while the other end was pierced into the ceiling. She looked down from above and coldly stared at Ron and the rest with eyes filled with killing intent. A cold aura filled the entire space, bringing with it an icy and strange killing intent. Cronia could not help but shiver. She stared at the large human-faced spider monster in front of her with eyes filled with fear. This was the first time she felt that death was so close to her. Chapter 873. Your Majesty, you've finally come out. Ron saw the Queen of Spiders and did not panic. Instead, he laughed. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Human? The moment she saw Ron's face, Rose's delicate and beautiful face showed a trace of astonishment. What surprised her was Ron's strength. It was not easy for a human to become a god, but why did she feel that his strength was somewhat familiar? Her surprise only lasted for a moment before Rose's face darkened. She waved her hand to stop the crypt spiders that were about to pounce on Ron. She said coldly, "Tell me why you're here, human. I can't believe you're here to die. Of course, if you're willing, I don't mind lending you a hand. I haven't tasted a god in a long time." It would be strange if there was no reason for him to take such a huge risk to enter the spider forest. Rose was not stupid. She could roughly guess Ron's intentions. This was not the first time something like this had happened. She just did not know which side this human who had become a god represented. Female sign X. I like this kind of conversation. Ron's lips curled up slightly, and he stopped Shea and the others. My purpose is simple. I want to borrow your strength to take over the forgotten city in the main plane of the undead Huckant. I'll tell you directly, I want to form an alliance with you. Facing the Queen of Spiders, Ron skipped a lot of formalities and went straight to the point. Ha ha ha. Unexpectedly, Rose giggled when she heard this. Her face was full of mockery. I admire your straightforwardness, human, but Rose tilted her head and looked at Ron, licking her lips greedily. I've heard the same words countless times, but none of them are new. Human, let me guess where you're from. Are you a lobbyist sent by the god of calamity, Fismai, or a subordinate of the dreadlord Serene? As soon as Lolth said this, Ron already knew that the god of calamity Fismai and the dreadlord Serene had sent people to rope in the Spider Queen Lolth, but it seemed that they had all failed. Lolth was not interested at all. Ron shook his head. I don't represent any of them. I only represent myself. Oh, now, who was the Spider Queen Lolth's turn to be surprised? She frowned in displeasure. Are you playing with me? There's no need. Ron took a deep breath and took out the Calamity God staff from behind him. He smiled and said, Your Majesty, take a look at this. Calamity God staff? The moment she saw the Calamity Divine staff, Rose's eyes widened. She was shocked and shrieked, You actually found it? Yes, Ron said calmly. From Rose's reaction, it seemed that Nicole wasn't lying. The Calamity God staff was the symbol of the Calamity Army. It had an important meaning. With it, one could command millions of undead. This was also the reason why the god of calamity Fismai and the dreadlord Serene had worked so hard to obtain it. Now it was time to see if the Calamity God staff lived up to its name. Rose slowly calmed down. She carefully looked at Ron and the Calamity God staff. How did you obtain it? Ron smiled and told her how he obtained the Calamity God staff. He didn't even hide the fact that he had inherited the power of the Lich King. In fact, there was no need to hide it at this point. So that's how it is. Rose out a long sigh. No wonder I felt a familiar power the moment you came in. So it was his divinity that merged with your soul. Everything makes sense now. At this moment, Rose waved her hand and dismissed the crypt spiders. Only Rose, Ron, Shea, Cronia, and Alice were left in the hall. The atmosphere eased slightly as both sides let go of their enmity. That's right. Ron narrowed his eyes. He knew that he had to strike while the iron was hot. So, Your Majesty has reconsidered our proposal? No. What surprised Ron and the others was that Rose refused without hesitation. Ever since the Scourge was defeated 100,000 years ago, I led my people and retreated here. Fortunately, those powerful fellows didn't find trouble with me in the past 100,000 years. All these years, Fismai and Serene tried their best to rope me in, but I rejected them all. At this point, Rose looked meaningfully at Ron. Although you have inherited his power, but unfortunately, you are not him. Your power is too far from his. You don't have the temperament and ability of a leader. Regretfully, I will not use the lives of my people to serve you. Although we are both in the undead plane, the matters of the undead have nothing to do with us crypt spiders. More than one person had said that Ron's power was too far from that of the Lich King, Hermes. Ron was well aware of this. The Lich King had left him a huge treasure trove. In reality, Ron had only obtained 2 or 3/10 of the treasure trove. He had inherited Hermes' divinity, but not all of the boundless energy of death. Ron, Shea, and Cronia looked at each other with dejected expressions. Only Alice stood there with an indifferent expression, as if this matter had nothing to do with her. "You can leave." Spider Queen Rose sighed. Her beautiful eyes swept over Ron and the others. When she saw Alice with her wings spread out behind her back, she frowned slightly. "For the sake of Hermes, I will not pursue your crimes of trespassing into the palace and killing my people. But don't mention the Alliance again. We are very safe here. We have no interest in participating in the war of the undead." After she finished speaking, she no longer paid any attention to Ron and the others. She stepped forward with her 8 huge spider claws, turned around, and left. As if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, Ron's blazing eyes turned into disappointment. He didn't think that his trip to the Spider Kingdom would end like this. The Calamity God staff was indeed the symbol of the Scourge army, but he wasn't the Lich King. He didn't have the prestige of the Lich King. Just the Calamity God staff alone wouldn't have been able to intimidate those brave and skilled subordinates of his. In the end, it still depended on strength. "Wait, Your Majesty," Ron said unwillingly. "Don't you care about your people at all? Are you willing to lead your people and hide in this spider forest forever?" "That's right. The spider forest is indeed a very safe fortress. But no matter how strong the fortress is, there will be a time when it will be breached. Your so-called safety now is only temporary. Any army that comes will flatten this place. A spider forest won't be able to stop the advance of a main army." The Scourge army. Ron took a step forward. His right hand was tightly clenched into a fist. His expression was full of excitement. "Only by reviving the Scourge army of the past will we be able to guarantee our strength and safety. This isn't just for the undead. It's the same for all living things in the main plane." "Ron." Rose stopped in her tracks. She turned around and said coldly, "Of course, I hope to revive the Scourge army of the past. Unfortunately, you aren't him. You don't have the ability and prestige. Even with me, you won't be able to fight against any army from the main plane. I'm sorry, Ron. I can't let my people and I participate in a war that we will definitely lose. Unless what?" Hearing this, Ron's eyes lit up. He knew that Rose had something else to say. Chapter 874. As soon as Lulf finished speaking, the atmosphere in the hall cooled down. Even the air was filled with a bone-chilling chill. Female Sign X, Lulf's spider-like body hung in the air. Her 8 huge legs were like sharp swords stuck into the ground. Killing intent gradually gathered on her beautiful face. "What are you trying to do?" Shea saw that the situation was bad. She held her long sword in front of Ron, but Ron waved his hand and stopped her. "Understand." Ron took a deep breath and nodded. Holding the Calamity staff, Ron's expression became serious. He chanted softly, and a powerful aura of death spread throughout the hall. "Not bad." Lulf nodded approvingly. Ron's strength was at least 20% of the Lich King's. At this moment, Rose smiled faintly. Her pair of beautiful eyes instantly turned green. Similarly, she also cultivated the divine power of death. The 2 divine energies of death collided in the hall. Countless ghosts intertwined and danced in the air. Sharp and mournful cries reverberated in the hall. The ground trembled slightly. Dust fell from the ceiling with a puff sound. Ron's Calamity staff spun faster and faster. The skulls rubbed against each other and made clack sounds. Shea, and Alice had already retreated to the side. Shea held her long sword and watched the 2 anxiously. If Ron was in danger, she would immediately rush over. At this moment, Lulf spoke. "Come, Ron. Let me see how much of Hermes' strength you have inherited." As she spoke, Lulf's hands formed a strange seal. A vast amount of divine energy of death surged out. Death mark. Boom. A huge skull appeared out of thin air. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced towards Ron. It was as if the god of death had descended. The most terrifying thing was that this death mark also carried a soul attack. I won't disappoint you. Ron's lips curled into a smile, but it soon turned cold. Death spear. Asterisk boom. Asterisk with a loud sound. The two divine energies of death collided. The ground cracked like a spider web. Asterisk clang. Clang. Asterisk after a while, the tremors finally stopped. Countless rocks fell from the ceiling. Ron and Lolth also slowly withdrew their power. Seeing that Ron was fine, Shea and Cronia sighed in relief. Their tense nerves immediately relaxed. How was it? Ron's eyebrows slightly raised, and he asked, That's a little out of my expectations. Rose smiled faintly, a trace of warmth appearing on her cold face. In her eyes, the flame that had been extinguished long ago once again burned fiercely. Rumble. Early the next morning, the entire spider forest began to tremble. It was as if mountains were collapsing. The ground began to sink. Countless towering trees were swallowed by the rolling debris. Ron, Shea, Cronia, Alice, and Lowell stood on a small hill and slowly watched the entire spider kingdom walk towards destruction. At this moment, Lolth had already withdrawn the 8 huge spider legs behind her and turned into an ordinary human beauty. She quietly watched the spider kingdom sink and turn into a lake. Why did you destroy it? At this moment, Alice finally could not help but ask. You've already lived here for 100,000 years. So what? Lolth turned around and smiled sweetly. Her gaze slowly moved upwards. Ron, Shea, Cronia, and Alice also turned around. Behind them were countless crypt spiders. There were at least tens of millions of them. From the moment I walked out of the Spider Kingdom, I had no intention of ever returning. Hakant District, Forgotten City. The battle had already been going on for 23 days. These days, the Holy Light Angel Corps had been attacking the city day and night. They were determined to take the Forgotten City, and the Orc Frostwolf Corps had no way out. They could only fight to the death. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties in this battle. It was not that Long had not thought of repairing the spatial gate, opening a path to the main plane of power, and mobilizing the main forces to fight the Holy Light Angel Corps. However, how could these actions be hidden from the angels flying in the sky? Both sides had fought near the spatial gate more than once. In the end, although the spatial gate was still in the hands of the orcs, it was almost destroyed. Long could only give up on this plan. This was the first clash between the Alliance of Justice and the Alliance of Evil since the First Planar War 100,000 years ago. With the Battle of the Forgotten City as the trigger, the curtains of the Second Planar War slowly opened. Long, dressed in full military attire, stood at the top of the city walls. The entire Forgotten City's walls had been destroyed beyond recognition. Even the armor on his body had been broken into pieces, leaving only a few pieces of broken armor hanging on his body. These days, he had led the orcs to break the Holy Light Angel Corps' attacks countless times. However, the Holy Light Angel Corps' tenacity was astonishing. They were still firmly rooted in the Forgotten City's position. Long slowly raised his gaze and saw that the ground below the Forgotten City's walls had been plowed. In the distance, he could faintly see a few angels. These bastards! Long could not help but curse. While he was cursing the angels, Long could not help but admire these powerful high-tier creatures. In these days of battle, he had completely witnessed the might of the angels. If he had not been the hero of the Frostwolf Corps this time, the Forgotten City would have been broken through long ago. At this point in the battle, the orcs were at a complete disadvantage. The Holy Light Angel Corps was just too powerful. In the Forgotten City, the orcs did not have many soldiers left. Faced with such a terrifying Holy Light Angel Corps, even the war god of the Bloodhoof Corps would not be able to do anything, right? Long silently thought to himself. When he thought of the angels descending from the sky, wave upon wave, Long's heart still palpitated with fear. On the ruined city walls, numerous black figures were busy. They were the undead who had been recruited by the orcs to participate in the defense of the city. They were not willing to be cannon fodder, but they were forced to do so by the orcs' giant axes. They had no choice but to tremble in fear. As soon as the angels appeared, they immediately cried and shrank back. These cowards, don't they know that we orcs are fighting for them? Thinking of the orc soldiers who had sacrificed themselves, Long's heart was filled with anger. He resented these undead for not being able to help at the critical moment. Long seemed to have forgotten that he had once ordered that the undead in the Forgotten City were not allowed to cultivate the energy of death. Once discovered, they would be immediately executed. At that time, Long had wanted to protect the orcs' rule and prevent another powerful hero from being born among the undead. That figure could be him. At this moment, Long thought of Ron, the powerful undead who had saved 3 people right under his nose. Although he did not know Ron's name, he had always been brooding over him. But at this moment, Long had no time to think about it anymore. The Holy Light Angel army in the distance was moving. This was the signal that the angels were preparing to attack the city. They had done this countless times already. Pass down my order. Frostwolf army, prepare for battle. Long shouted loudly. His voice traveled far and wide. Yes, Lord Long. Hearing this voice, the orcs trembled and stood up energetically. Even the orcs who had fallen asleep at the foot of the wall crawled up with simple weapons in their hands. Although their side was at a complete disadvantage, the orcs displayed extremely high tactical qualities. The angels' horns had already been blown. The ground army in white clothes and white armor began to charge. They marched in orderly steps towards the top of the Forgotten City's walls like an unstoppable flood of steel. Then a white line appeared between the sky and the earth. That was the dark cloud formed by countless angels pressing down on the Forgotten City. My lord, look, it's the undead. They've pushed the undead out again. In the sky, Gray pointed to the ground and shouted. A large number of undead were pushed out from the top of the Forgotten City's walls. They were crying and trembling. Some of them could not stop kneeling and begging for mercy. Shameless orcs. They've pushed these pitiful creatures out to die again. Seeing this scene, John's face showed a helpless smile. The orcs had used this shameless tactic more than once. They used the undead as cannon fodder to deplete the Holy Light Angel army's magic power. But these weak undead were not even qualified to be cannon fodder. Kill them all. Don't be an eyesore. John said expressionlessly. Gray, I'll leave these guys to you. Yes, Lord John. Gray was overjoyed when he heard this. He had perfectly completed the mission of destroying the spatial door. He had also made a lot of contributions in the Battle of the Forgotten City. As he wished, he was promoted to be John's assistant. At this moment, Gray was smug and proud of his success. He had long forgotten about Alice. John smiled slightly. He looked at the undead on the ground who were begging for mercy. He could not help but feel a trace of contempt in his heart. The scourge of 100,000 years ago was just a legend, right? How could these lowly creatures defeat the legion of holy angels? Impossible. As an angel born after the First Plane War, Hardadef didn't believe that the undead had such an ability. Looking at the undead on the ground, Hardadef couldn't associate them with the word powerful. At this moment, John's gaze was fixed on the figure who was still standing proudly on top of the city wall. That was Long, one of the strongest orc heroes. At this moment, he was already holding a sword in his hand, ready to fight. I was wondering who it was. Isn't it the Archangel John who was beaten by me time and time again like a pitiful puppy? Long waved the sword in his hand and laughed maniacally when he saw John. His words were half true and half false in order to attack John's confidence and morale. What? You're here to die again? Unexpectedly, Hardadef had long seen through his scheme. He laughed and said, Your Excellency Long, the results have proven countless times that these little tricks of instigation are useless against our Holy Light Angel Corps. If you have the ability, then speak with your strength. Very well. Seeing that his provocation had failed, Long did not mind. He waved the sword in his hand. Then let's see, Archangel John. I hope your strength is as good as your mouth. Boom, bang, 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 bang. On top of the Forgotten City's city wall, 2 tall figures were crisscrossing. One was holding a 2-handed sword, while the other was holding a 1-handed sword and shield. The beast god's power and Guangming's divine power exploded at the same time. At this moment, the Holy Angel Legion had already broken into the city and started fighting the orc army in the city. The ground army was led by Gray and killed the cannon fodder like undead at lightning speed. They quickly defeated the orc army and broke through the city gate. Then, a brutal street battle began. This time, the Holy Angel Legion had come out in full force. The Frostwolf Legion could not hold on any longer. Long's heart sank. This time, it seemed that the Forgotten City would not be able to be saved, and even he himself would. Lord Long, give up. If you leave the Forgotten City, I'll let you live. How about it? John saw that victory was within his grasp, and a long-lost smile finally appeared on his handsome face. Go to hell. Long was infuriated. He swung the sword in his hand, using his actions to reject John's good intentions. Stubborn bastard, John snorted coldly. The one-handed sword in his hand danced even faster, and he attacked Long like a storm. Rumble, rumble, rumble. At this moment, a strong tremor came from the distant horizon. It was accompanied by an intimidating aura. A terrifying aura enveloped everyone's hearts. What's that sound? Both Long and Hardedef were stunned for a moment. They immediately separated from each other and looked into the distance. They could see that on the horizon, a dense swarm of silhouettes was slowly appearing. These silhouettes were slowly crawling on the ground. They were the infamous crypt spiders of the undead plane. What's that? John did not recognize the crypt spiders, but the battle of the Forgotten City that he was determined to win had changed. A layer of haze covered his face. It's the crypt spiders, the undead army. Damn it, where did this undead army come from? Long said with a frown. He was not nervous about the arrival of these undead. To him, the undead were just a lowly, clumsy name. Swoosh, a tall war flag was suddenly raised in the midst of the crypt spiders. It fluttered irregularly in the wind. On the flag was embroidered a blood-red skull. Long and John's faces immediately changed. Chapter 875. Countless banners fluttered in the wind, forming a sea of blood. Millions of crypt spiders gathered below the Forgotten City, waiting for their queen's orders. Lolth led her spider army and finally arrived at the battlefield. Yin is not equal to female sign X. The spider Empress Lolth walked past the huge swarm of spiders and stood proudly on the battlefield. A light breeze blew her beautiful hair. Under the illumination of the morning sun, a delicate and beautiful face was revealed. Her emotionless eyes emitted a cold aura. What's going on? It's the undead. The undead army is here. Oh my, there are so many undead. There must be millions of them, right? The sudden arrival of the army caused the orcs and angels to stop fighting in the Forgotten City. They looked at the undead in shock. The undead in the Forgotten City also opened their mouths in shock. The crypt spiders had been separated from the undead for too long. Many of them had forgotten that they used to be a race under the undead. Crypt spiders, it's an army of crypt spiders. Has Lord Ron succeeded? A skinny old man wiped the corners of his eyes and looked outside the city in disbelief. He was the oak barrel wise man Laszlo. The scourge, it's the flag of the scourge. How is this possible? John's eyes flashed, and he laughed coldly. That coward Fismai dares to interfere in the war between the orcs and angels? Is he tired of living? On the surface, Fismai was the ruler of the undead main plane and the leader of the scourge. However, in reality, Fismai had secretly sided with the Legion of Holy Angels and became their puppet. This was an open secret in the undead main plane. Because of this, Dreadlord Saruman and Spider Queen Lolth didn't care about him. They didn't recognize this guy who called himself the Divine Emperor of Calamity. Saruman's Plague Legion even clashed with Fismai's Scourge Legion many times. John naturally knew this, and this was why he dared to lead an army to attack the Forgotten City. He knew that Fismai wouldn't dare to interfere, but the Scourge army had come. It's not Fismai, Long said in a low voice. His eyes were fixed on the beautiful figure that suddenly appeared in the group of crypt spiders. What the hell, why is she here? Not Fismare. Hardedef frowned. If it wasn't Fismai, then where did this undead army come from? They were carrying the banner of the Scourge. Looks like our battle has come to an end. These undead's target is the Forgotten City, Long said in a deep voice. Hardadef smiled disapprovingly. Isn't it just undead? How dare these fellows strut around in front of my holy light angel core? In Johan's eyes, the undead were existences that couldn't even withstand a single blow. When he had attacked the Forgotten City, he had never considered the undead. Although there seemed to be a lot of undead in front of him, as long as the Angel Corps charged, the undead would be routed and run in all directions before being annihilated by the Angel Corps. Don't underestimate these undead. They're different. Lung stared at the beautiful figure that appeared in the distance and could not help but remind, Sir John, I suggest that we work together to destroy these undead. Hardadef looked at Lung in disdain and sneered. Sorry, we don't have the habit of working with losers. Ew. When Lung heard this, anger rose in his heart, but he quickly calmed down. Indeed, they had the advantage in terms of numbers, but in the end, they were defeated. No matter how arrogant Lung was, he had no choice but to accept this fact. The angel race was indeed a high-level creature that was favored by the gods. Hardadef smiled. Since that's the case, I'll let you see how we angels defeat these useless undead. The Forgotten City's orc army was already struggling at death's door, so there was no need to worry. Hardadef looked at the undead, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a contemptuous smile. It's him, Long. Rose smiled and gently brushed her beautiful hair, instantly revealing a myriad of emotions. I didn't think that my first opponent, after coming back, would be this little fellow. Little fellow. Hearing this, Ron could not help but be stunned. To be able to call a powerful god a little fellow, Rose could be considered an anomaly. Just as Ron was preparing to deploy for battle, he saw countless angels gathering in the sky above the Forgotten City and charging towards them with great momentum. There were only a few tens of thousands of angels, but they had to face an army of over 1 million crypt spiders. He did not know if Hardadef was too arrogant or if he was too confident in his own strength. They're here. Ron's heart tightened. He gripped the Calamity God staff in his hand and shouted in a deep voice, Rose, prepare for battle immediately. Haha, Ron, don't worry. These angels can't do anything to us. Rose's eyes narrowed. To her, this was a very typical act of suicide. As the Calamity Army's strength was at its peak 100,000 years ago, she did not put these tens of thousands of angels in her eyes at all. Closer, closer, and closer. Ron's breathing became hurried. When he left the Forgotten City, he had personally witnessed the might of the Holy Light Angel Army. These angels were individually powerful and had great teamwork. Together, they were a powerful force that could not be underestimated. The angels arranged themselves in a fixed offensive formation, flying without any disorder. Their bodies flickered with all sorts of buffs, and their eyes were filled with fanaticism, as if they were facing a god. Gray flapped his wings and led a large group of angels to attack. He did not know why, but when he saw the large number of undead army in front of him, Gray faintly felt uneasy. A sense of danger suppressed his heart. What's going on? They were getting closer and closer, and Gray felt his heartbeat rapidly increasing. Cold sweat seeped through his armor and instantly drenched his clothes. At this moment, he saw a human woman suddenly appear in the midst of the crypt spiders. This human woman was extremely beautiful, but this was not the main point. Every angel, regardless of gender, was extremely handsome. Wait, why did her face seem so familiar? The moment Gray saw that woman, his body shook violently. The woman's face in front of him instantly overlapped with the face in his memory. It's her. Gray abruptly stopped his body, and a discordant note appeared in the angel battle formation. This was absolutely forbidden in the war in the main plane of order. As the leader, Gray would definitely be severely punished when he returned. But now, he couldn't care less about that. He screamed like a madman. Not good. There's danger ahead. Quickly retreat. Retreat. Get ready. At this moment, Rose looked at the sky and smiled coldly, slowly raising her right hand. Release. Swish, swish, swish. In an instant, countless crypt spiders opened their mouths, and countless threads shot out from these hideous and terrifying creatures, shooting into the sky like arrows. Not good. My wings are stuck. Help. I'm gonna fall. The threads shot from the ground into the air formed a dense anti-air net, and the angels were all caught in it. Some of their bodies tilted and fell, and what greeted them below was the bloody mouths of countless crypt spiders. Gray's body was trembling, and so was his heart. The scene in front of him was exactly the same as the scene 100,000 years ago. The anti-air net formed by interweaving spider threads caused the angels to fall to the ground one after another. Although these terrifying crypt spiders were not strong individually, they were the nemesis of all flying creatures. Retreat. Retreat. Quickly retreat. Gray tried his best to command the angels to retreat quickly. Some of the angels could not retreat in time and had already fallen into the crypt spiders. The crypt spiders surged forward, and Gray could only watch as they were dismembered. How could this be? Hardedef watched until his eyeballs almost fell out. He could not believe that such a ridiculous scene had actually happened before his eyes. Powerful angels had actually suffered such a crushing defeat. It's the crypt spiders. Lung took a deep breath and said, "They're the most terrifying anti-air army. They're indeed powerful." Ron and Shea looked at each other, and they could see the shock in each other's eyes. Rose's tactics were completely out of their expectations. Could this be the true strength of the Scourge 100,000 years ago? No wonder Fismai and Saruman wanted to rope Rose in. No matter which camp this huge spider army joined, it would be the strongest force. If not for the fact that Ron was the appointed successor of the Lich King Hermes and had the Scourge staff in hand, with Spider Queen Rose's arrogant personality, there was no way she would work for him. Lord, Hardedef. Gray flew back to Hardedef like a stray dog and said breathlessly, his eyes still filled with deep fear, "You don't have to say anything, I know." Chapter 876. In order to deal with the threat of the undead, the two slave masters with ulterior motives easily came to a compromise. At this moment, they had a common goal. After a round of charging, although the Holy Light Angel Corps had suffered some losses, their main force was still there, especially the ground troops. Other than fighting with the orcs, they basically did not suffer too many losses. Although the Holy Light Angel Corps was not as strong as the orcs, their tactics, coordination, awareness, and equipment were far superior. In addition, the Holy Light Angel Corps was filled with many paladins and priests. These professions could heal the soldiers' injuries and raise their morale, and played an important role in battle. Often, after being half crippled and carried down, the injured soldiers would quickly reappear on the battlefield. This was also the reason why the Holy Light Angel Corps was able to defeat the orcs despite having fewer people. If the undead army had not appeared, the Holy Light Angel Corps would have defeated the Frostwolf Corps and taken over the Forgotten City without any suspense. Ron's appearance did not cause John to panic. The Holy Light Angel Corps also quickly calmed down after a round of rest, although more than half of them had died. Immediately after, countless halos and healing lights lit up in an orderly manner, showing the high level of tactical quality. Long stood at the top of the city walls with a complicated look on his face. As the true controller of the Forgotten City, he was not willing to hand it over to the angels or the undead. However, between the angels and the undead, Long did not hesitate to choose the angels. The reason was simple. He did not want to see a powerful Scourge army appear, especially after Ron saw the Spider Queen Lolth. From 100,000 years ago, he deeply understood how terrifying Lolth was. The Holy Light Angel Corps led by John was also on guard. Now, he also knew that the undead army in front of him was different from the ones before. The orcs and angels began to retreat. They slowly retreated into the city, on high alert. The experienced soldiers had already begun to guard the various strongholds. They've retreated. Lolth frowned. This is a bit difficult. This commander is not an idiot. Yes, Ron slowly nodded. No matter what, we have to take over the Forgotten City. This is our most important stronghold, but we only have the crypt spiders. Rose turned around and glanced at Ron as she smiled. Without the cooperation of the other undead soldiers, it will be very difficult for the cave spiders to break through the Forgotten City. Even if they could, they would have to pay a great price. In the end, the crypt spiders' combat power was still too weak. Even a God Realm Crypt Spider King was not much stronger than an ordinary God Realm powerhouse. I can charge at the front. Shea waved her knight's sword and said, "The crypt spiders can just follow behind me." Rose smiled faintly, but did not reply. At this moment, Alice, who had been silent this entire time, suddenly said, "Actually, there's no need to worry too much. According to what I know, after so many days of fighting, the orcs have been almost completely crippled, and the Angel Corps have suffered great losses. We have a good chance of taking down the Forgotten City." Rose glanced at Ron. Her eyes were filled with surprise, but she didn't say anything. Ron also looked at Alice curiously. Although he had saved her from Long's hands, she had betrayed the Angel Corps for this? Alice's face was expressionless. The sword in her hand was very clear. At this moment, her eyes narrowed. She saw a familiar figure, gray. Alice's face revealed a cold smile. Before the great battle, the atmosphere was somewhat stifling. The air was also filled with a suffocating smell. "Prepare to attack. We can't just wait." Rose smiled faintly. Her eyes were filled with impatience. "Okay." Ron nodded and then began to chant in a low voice. Not long after, countless skeletons, ghouls, gargoyles, terranites, abyssal skeletal dragons, frost dragons, skeleton monarchs, and other undead creatures were summoned. "Kill!" At Shea's command, the nightmare beast under her rushed out like a whirlwind and charged. Countless blood-red skeleton war flags fluttered in the wind. Soaring murderous intent pressed towards the Forgotten City. The black mass of crypt spiders was like heavily armored warriors, but also like demons from hell. They let out strange cries, and disgusting saliva flowed out of their mouths. They were filled with unease and fear. "They're here. Prepare for battle." John shouted. The ground troops of the Angel Corps gathered. Every one of them was wearing gorgeous heavy armor. A sun was engraved on their thick shields. This was the symbol of the Angel Corps. Lung also ordered the Frostwolf army to prepare for battle. The Tauren troops with totem poles on their backs, the Frostwolf knights riding giant wolves, the orc shamans wearing strange robes, and the troll hunters wielding spears all stepped out. "Roar!" Rose let out a low roar and jumped with all her might. Her body instantly grew bigger, and then a huge, terrifying creature appeared in front of everyone. At this moment, Rose had already turned into a crypt spider. However, she was several times bigger than a normal crypt spider. Her whole body was covered in a carapace that was as hard as steel. A few long, strange, huge horns protruded from her head. Her beautiful face was hidden in the carapace, and only a pair of cold eyes could be seen. Her 6 legs supported her on the ground, and her speed was not slower than Shea's. Her hands turned into 2 huge claws that were as sharp as scythes. She sees Rose. Suddenly seeing Rose's true form, Ron was shocked. This was the first time he saw the Spider Empress in her true form. "That's right," a crypt Spider King behind him said coldly. "This is Her Majesty the Spider Empress' true form. However, she doesn't like to transform into this form." Soon, Rose had already passed by Shea and arrived at the Forgotten City. She leaped, and her huge body jumped up high like a flea. The armor on her back spread open its wings, and she jumped up to the top of the city wall. "Quick, kill her!" The angels turned pale with fright. Then paladins, priests, warriors, and other ground troops rushed up to the top of the city wall. They waved their weapons and attacked Rose. Rose laughed lightly and went up to meet them without any hesitation. At this moment, her eyes had turned green. "Piercing spear," Rose shouted, and her scythe-like pincers slammed into the ground. Sharp spikes suddenly protruded from the ground and spread in all directions like ripples. "Ah, not good. I've been stabbed. Save me," Damn it, where did these things come from? The strange attack method caused the angels and orcs to panic. Some of them were pierced by the spikes protruding from the ground, while others were hung on the spikes. They died miserable deaths. That's right, it's her. Gray's body trembled. He hid behind the crowd, not daring to rush up. The huge monster standing in front of him was one of the heroes who led the undead army to attack the city amongst the clouds 100,000 years ago, the Queen of the Crypt Spiders, the Queen of Spiders. This terrifying figure often appeared in his nightmares and became the most terrifying fear in Gray's heart. Kill! Kill! She was over 4 meters tall, a head taller than the largest Tauren warrior. At this moment, she was like a sophisticated killing machine. Broken limbs flew everywhere, and blood splattered all over the ground. Although Rose did not have any weapons, the 2 pincers in front of her were her strongest weapons. They were hard and sharp, and even divine weapons would not be able to harm them. Some of the warriors had already closed in on Rose, roaring and thrusting their swords at her. Spike shield. Rose did not even look and directly used the spike shield skill. Then, countless spikes protruded from her hard carapace. The warrior let out a blood-curdling scream and then slowly fell to the ground. His eyes were wide open, and he died with everlasting regret. Long live, long live. The crypt spiders that covered the mountains and plains roared, forming a huge sound wave, cheering for their queen. Then they increased their attack. These ugly creatures with 6 hind legs and 2 pincers clung to the city walls like ants. They climbed up the walls as if they were flat ground. All of this made Shea and Cronia feel incomparably shocked. This was the first time they saw the Scourge's attack, style 100,000 years ago. She's even stronger than I imagined. Cronia's eyes were filled with fear and also a trace of reverence. This is the Queen of Spiders' true strength? Shad took a deep breath and said, "It seems that she was holding back on us. If it wasn't for the sake of the Lich King," that's right, thinking of this, Cronia's heart could not help but tremble. If Ron did not have the Scourge staff, or if he had received the Lich King's inheritance, who knew what this terrifying Queen of Spiders would have done? She was powerful, arrogant, insufferably arrogant, and did not have any scruples. Apart from the Lich King, it would be hard to find a second person who could suppress her. Ron, who was observing from the side, was also inwardly alarmed. What he had released was a terrifying killing machine. Kill these crypt spiders. Don't let them climb up. At this moment, the angel army and orcs defending the Forgotten City had already started fighting with the crypt spiders. They put aside their grudges and poured all of their anger and remaining magic skills on these ugly creatures that had suddenly appeared. Ha! Blood. So much blood. The smell of slaughter really makes me miss it. Lolth went on a killing spree on the city walls, releasing the killing intent that she had suppressed for 100,000 years. Corpses littered the ground around her. There were orcs, angels, and some who had not died. They were curled up on the ground, moaning, and the atmosphere of fear continued to spread. 100,000 years ago, when Lolth pledged her loyalty to the Lich King and the Scourge army, she was synonymous with the Grim Reaper. She was cruel, bloodthirsty, and under that beautiful appearance was a cold heart. Although her strength was about the same as the Dreadlord Saruman's, she was far more terrifying. Lolth, who was eating an angel's leg, suddenly felt a sense of danger. She suddenly raised the pincer in her hand. Boom! With a loud sound, 2 waves of divine power erupted without restraint. A circular depression formed on top of the city walls, and it was spreading in all directions. "It's you." Lolth focused her gaze. In front of her was an orc who was not very tall, and an angel whom she did not recognize. Both of them had godlike strength. Yo, when did the orcs and angels form an alliance? Why didn't I know about it? The Queen of Spiders squinted her eyes and stared at the two with vigilance. This is something worth celebrating. Why didn't you inform me? Queen of Spiders. Long held a long sword in his hand and stood proudly in front of Lolth. He said coldly, "Although I don't know why you left the spider forest, this was not a wise choice. More accurately, You shouldn't have gotten involved in this mess. Lord Long and I have no alliance. Chapter 877. If not for the fact that the battle with the orcs had cost the angel army too much, with John's character, he would not have allied with the orcs, even if it was only temporary. However, now that the situation was dire, he would have to retreat to the main plane of order with his angel army of hundreds of thousands. The timing of the Scourge army's arrival was too good. Bang, bang. At this moment, the Spider army was attacking the Forgotten City. They climbed up the city walls like ants and fought fiercely with the defenders. At this moment, the top of the Forgotten City had become a hellish battlefield. Blood splattered and filled half the sky. Countless ghost-like things hovered above the city walls like flies that had smelled blood. On the other side, the orcs and angels stood together, which was rare for them. They held broken weapons in their hands and roared as they attacked the crypt spiders that climbed up the city walls. The ground troops of the angel army were much more organized than the scattered orcs. The paladins, crusaders, and priests formed a strange formation to resist the crypt spiders that surged up like a tide. Although they were few in number, their combined combat power was stronger than that of the orcs. The orc turrets roared angrily again, and shells exploded in the midst of the crypt spiders. Smoke filled the air, and these creatures with weak defenses couldn't withstand the destruction of the shells at all. They were instantly blown to smithereens. Even so, these creatures couldn't stop their advance. They continued to swarm over and attack like a tidal wave. The blood-red skull flag fluttered in the wind. The angel army is indeed powerful. I can't imagine how Hermes defeated them back then. Ron did not feel much when he watched the angels and orcs fight from afar, but when he really faced them, he sighed. The combat power of the angel army was much higher than that of the orcs. They cooperated well and advanced and retreated well. Although they were fewer in number, they were firmly nailed to the city walls like a nail. No matter how the spiders attacked like a tide, they did not retreat half a step. At this moment, Ron's gaze fell on the undead in the Forgotten City, and he could not help but frown. There were over 1 million undead in the Forgotten City, and some of them had joined the orcs, while others had surrendered to the angels. However, most of the undead had looks of confusion on their faces, and they did not know what to do. At this moment, she was like a powerful war chariot, unstoppable and unstoppable. Her forelimbs were shaped like pincers and sharp like swords. They could easily cut through the tough armor of the paladins and block the heavy battle axes of the orcs. On the other hand, the carapace on her body was impenetrable. When the blades slashed at her, they could only leave shallow blood marks on her body. At this moment, a large number of mutilated corpses lay around Rose. Her body was already drenched in blood. Clang! Finally, the slaughter chariot came to a stop. The ones who could stop Rose were none other than John and Long. They had abandoned their opponents and appeared in front of Rose, one on the left and one on the right. Hee. When did the orcs and the angels form an alliance? How come I didn't know? Rose smiled. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the two with a mocking gaze. She raised her pincers high and was secretly on guard. John and Lung looked at each other with an awkward expression. You don't need to know. John coldly snorted. The long sword in his hand emitted a myriad of light. Lung was even more direct. Die! As they spoke, the two figures rose into the sky and charged towards Rose with their weapons raised. Boom! 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 An intense battle unfolded on the city wall. The Orc God's power, Guangming's power, and the Death God's power collided with each other, creating huge sparks. The entire Forgotten City shook, and the terrifying aura in the air made people tremble. In the blink of an eye, the two had already exchanged over 100 blows. Each of their moves contained a powerful divine power that surged on the city wall like a tidal wave. Rose was fighting one against two. In the beginning, she could still hold on for a few blows, but gradually, she was at a disadvantage. I was careless. These two are really difficult to deal with. Drops of sweat appeared on Rose's forehead. At this moment, she glanced over and saw Ron's figure. She was delighted. Ron, If you don't come and help me, I'm afraid I'll die here." Hearing this voice, Ron, who was summoning undead creatures to fight, could not help but be startled. He turned around and saw the Spider Queen Rose fighting against Long and John. Although she was powerful, under the combined suppression of the two, she was beaten back repeatedly. Ron, hearing this voice, Lung turned around and met Ron's gaze. "It's you?" Lung was shocked. He recognized that this was the human who had exchanged blows with him. Ron stood quietly in the air and coldly looked at the other party. "In order to deal with us, you orcs actually formed an alliance with the angels. Hee, this is the disgrace of the demon faction." "So what?" Long clenched his teeth. "You undead have occupied such a vast land and have such rich black crystal ores, but you can't use them to your fullest potential. Rather than letting others occupy your resources, why don't you give them to us, the Beastmen? Compared to the resource-rich undead plane, the black crystal ores in the strength plane were much inferior in both quality and quantity. This was also the reason why the Frostwolf army took the risk of betraying the Alliance and took the lead in occupying Forgotten City. Shameless. He had seen Shameless before, but never to this extent. The orcs had found a perfect excuse to cover up their blatant invasion. Ron's facial muscles twitched a few times. One could see the anger in his heart, but he quickly calmed down. "Orcs, you will pay the price for your greed. Come, undead." Lung retreated instead of advancing. He waved the long sword in his hand, and rays of light kept gathering. "Let me see if you have the right to talk to me." "Bladestorm!" Lung shouted loudly, and his body turned into a huge whirlwind. The powerful beast god power broke through the void and swept towards Ron. Bladestorm was Lung's famous ultimate skill. It was very powerful, and when combined with the celestial weapon Bloodthirsty Blade, its power was multiplied. At this moment, Lung was like a furious god. The storm raged and destroyed everything in its path. What a powerful battle skill, as expected of Lung. Rose sucked in a breath of cold air. Even she had no choice but to retreat from the might of Bladestorm. However, there was one person who did not retreat, and that was Ron. His tall figure stood in the air, and his eyes turned green. Wisps of black gas quickly gathered and formed a huge skull. It was like the god of death had descended from the sky. The strange and vast death god power intimidated everyone. Shadow of Death. The powerful death god power transformed into a ferocious and terrifying death god figure and violently attacked Lung. The collision between the god of death and the beast god's power continued to spread out like waves, forming a huge energy vortex. Some of the pitiful beastmen were directly sucked in, and with a blood-curdling scream, their bodies were instantly torn to pieces. Boom! As the two fought, the huge city wall caved in. Countless boulders fell, and a huge hole appeared in the gate of the Forgotten City. "The city is breached. The city is breached. Long live!" The undead army let out a loud cry, and the orcs and angels of the Forgotten City turned pale. At this moment, countless undead had already rushed into the city and started fighting with the city's defenders. "You're all finished." Rose let out a soft laugh. At this moment, her only opponent was Hardadef, and the pressure on her was greatly reduced. She immediately increased the speed of her attack. Not necessarily. Hardadef didn't back down. The longsword in his hand danced even faster. His handsome face was filled with unswerving determination. As a powerful battle angel, Hardadef's innate arrogance never allowed him to back down, even though he was at a complete disadvantage in the battle with Rose. Boom! Hardadef and Rose exchanged a blow, and he was forced back a few steps by her pincers. With a swish, Hardadef spread out the pure white wings behind his back and stabilized his body. Just as Hardadef was about to launch another attack, a faintly discernible light in the Forgotten City attracted his attention. Hardadef was floating in the air and saw everything clearly. He was stunned at first, and then his eyes opened wide. There was shock and anger in his eyes, because the source of that light was the spatial gate. Around the spatial gate, countless orcs were busily working, and the destroyed spatial gate was being repaired bit by bit. The cunning Lung knew that between the angels and the undead, he was the weakest. He pretended to use the conditions of an alliance to stabilize Hardedef, but his true goal was to repair the spatial gate. Hardedef agreed to the temporary alliance with Lung, but gave the opportunity to repair the spatial gate to him. As soon as the spatial gate was restored to normal, an endless stream of orcs would rush over from the power plane. The Holy Light Angel Corps was a lone army in the undead plane, and the undead with only the crypt spiders could not exert their power. When that time came, the orcs would become the strongest side, and the balance of the war would tilt in their favor. This was a lie, a blatant lie. He was too careless, too careless. These filthy, lowly, and despicable trash creatures. Hardedef's face turned green and white, and anger flashed across his face. At this moment, he was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He took a deep breath and made a prompt decision, and immediately gave an order to Gray. Gray, take some men and destroy the spatial gate right now. Yes, sir. What? Gray, who was fighting with the undead, received Hardedef's message in his mind. He could not help but be stunned. Didn't we already form an alliance with the orcs? Alliance my ass, we were deceived. Hardedef was so angry that he started cursing. These cunning orcs have no sincerity at all. Don't worry about anything now. Take some men and rush over immediately and completely destroy the spatial gate. Yes, sir, I'll do it right away. After hearing Hardedef's words, Gray understood. He called out, and several angels flapped their wings and soared into the sky, flying in the direction of the spatial gate. Damn it! Seeing the figures of the angels flying away, Lung's face turned gloomy. He knew that his plan had failed. The other side had taken precautions, but he was held back by this hateful human in front of him. Chapter 878. The Forgotten City Space Gate was bustling with activity. Countless orc laborers were busy. They were holding coarse, ugly, and huge stones and moving them to the edge of the space gate with great difficulty. The craftsmen compared the fragments of the space gate and skillfully stuck the fragments into the stone pillars of the space gate. Sweat flowed down the muscular bodies of the orc laborers and dripped to the ground. Looking at the spatial gate that was slowly being repaired, a victorious smile appeared on their faces. When Gray led the angels to the spatial gate, everything in front of him made him unable to restrain his anger. At this moment, the repair of the spatial gate was almost complete and was emitting a faintly discernible light. As long as the spatial gate was repaired, the angels would have nothing to do with the battle of the Forgotten City. Gray's eyes were filled with anger. He had never thought that the orcs, who had always been stupid, would actually play around with the angels, who claimed to be high-level creatures. Kill! Gray almost spat out this word from between his teeth. As soon as his voice fell, the long sword in his hand slashed out like a meteor and cut the orc closest to him into two. Oh no, the angels are coming. The orc laborers were frightened. They screamed and ran in panic. They were in a mess and trampled on each other. There were countless deaths and injuries. They looked very strong, but they were far from being a match for the angels. The angels slashed one by one, and soon they all fell into pools of blood. Kill them all. Don't leave a single one alive. Gray gave the order coldly. He did not care about the lowly lives of these pitiful orc laborers at all, even though they were not all innocent. The angels faithfully carried out Gray's orders. They were all precise killing machines. Under their almost perfect appearance was a cold heart. Broken limbs, broken arms, flying heads. Blood flowed all over the ground as far as the eyes could see. Accompanied by the screams and begging for mercy of the orc laborers, Gray's exquisite face was filled with ferocity. Every step he took left a dark red footprint on the ground. Roar! Just as Gray and his angels were wantonly killing, a furious roar broke the strange silence, and a glimmer of despair appeared in the eyes of the orc laborers who were in despair. Boom! With a light touch from the heavy body, the huge and sturdy wall collapsed with a loud bang. Amidst the smoke and dust that filled the sky, many stalwart figures were revealed. They wore heavy armor and had blood-red eyes that resembled copper bells. They held huge shields in one hand and heavy war drums in the other. Their thick nostrils exhaled angrily, and their eyes that were filled with anger and hatred kept sizing up the angels. Their killing intent kept condensing. It's the Tauren. The Tauren warriors have come to save us. As one of the most powerful soldiers among the orcs, the appearance of the Tauren warriors calmed the panicked atmosphere. The orc laborers hugged each other and wept. Tauren? Gray's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately went on full alert. He knew better than anyone how terrifying the Tauren warriors were on the battlefield. Berserk! In an instant, the eyes of all the Minotaurs turned blood red. Then, these powerful Minotaurs raised their weapons and charged at the angels. Be careful! The angels turned pale with fright. They flapped their wings, intending to fly. The Tauren warriors of the orcs were powerful and could be said to be invincible on the ground, but they had a weakness, which was that they could not attack in the air. Most of the angels were lucky. They flapped their wings and flew into the air, but a small number of angels' feet seemed to have grown roots on the ground. They could not fly at all. Their bodies trembled, and their delicate faces were filled with extreme fear. They had been hit by the Tauren warriors' eyes of fear. This was a powerful mental attack that caused the other party to be unable to move due to fear. Bang! The Tauren warriors crashed into the angels. The angels who could not dodge in time were thrown out like kites with their strings cut. When they landed on the ground, they were no longer in human form. These guys, their strength is really too terrifying. Gray, who was flying in the air, thought with lingering fear. At this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. He could only watch helplessly as his companions were crushed into meat paste. The strength of the Tauren warriors was evident. Even the powerful angels could not gain the slightest advantage in front of the Tauren warriors in terms of strength. Lord Gray, what do we do now? An angel beside him asked. At this moment, his teeth were chattering. The Tauren warriors below let out angry roars. Even though they knew that the other party would not fly up, they were still scared witless. Gray took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart. After thinking for a moment, he resolutely replied, "No matter what, we have to stop them from repairing the spatial gate. This is Lord Hardadef's order." Yes, Lord Gray. Perhaps due to Gray's influence, the angels gradually calmed down. Their fearful expressions slowly returned to solemnity. They raised the long swords in their hands. For the glory of the gods. Kill! The angels angrily roared and turned into streams of light, suddenly rushing down. A mountain of corpses, a sea of blood, the angels of the Holy Light Angel Corps dauntlessly charged at the spatial gate. Unfortunately, they were beaten back again and again by the Tauren warriors. The totem poles on the backs of the Tauren warriors were already bright red. Both sides had already used all their strength and would not rest until one of them died. The orcs had the advantage. As an endless stream of Tauren warriors poured out of the city, Gray and his angel corps were heavily surrounded. Even though they were the army closest to the spatial gate in the Holy Light Angel Corps, every step forward was abnormally difficult. They paid the price of blood and even their lives. With the hard work of the orcs, the repair of the spatial gate was carried out in an orderly manner. In Forgotten City, the light was getting brighter and brighter. The situation was getting worse and worse. Gray became anxious. He seemed to see the heavy black shadows behind the spatial gate. If the orcs from the Strength Main Plain rushed out, then everything would be over. Powell, Rome, Janice, seeing the lives of angels disappear one after another, Gray was extremely angry. These were the most powerful battle angels. Powell's head was chopped off by an orc. Rome's head was crushed by a Tauren, and the most miserable one was Janice. This young female angel with brown curly hair and beautiful brown eyes was chopped into meat paste by the crazy orcs. War was so cruel, whether it was for orcs or angels. Under the encirclement of more and more orcs, the team of angels led by Gray was gradually losing. Gray was the leader of this group of angels and was also the strongest angel, so he naturally became the target of the orcs. In front of him stood 3 tall, towering warriors, 6 strong orc soldiers, and 8 troll hunters with spears. Even someone as powerful as Gray would not feel relaxed in the face of this pressure. At this moment, Gray was almost covered in blood. It was unclear whether it was his blood or the orcs. His body was covered in wounds, and his exquisite armor had long been shattered beyond recognition. One of the holy and beautiful wings on his back was also broken. He looked abnormally miserable. Gray kept roaring, and his eyes were blood red. What was different from his crazy fighting posture was his strength. At this moment, the light on his body was slowly dimming, and he was almost at the end of his rope. Quick! Attack together. Get rid of him first. The orcs with rough appearances were definitely not stupid. They had already seen that Gray, this powerful battle angel, was at the end of his rope. In an instant, countless crude weapons greeted Gray. Boom! Gray held a long sword and clashed with a towering warrior. He only felt his vision darken, and he almost fell down. He gathered his remaining strength to stabilize himself, and then he laughed crazily. Ha! Come on, you bastards. I'll let you see the power of a battle angel. As soon as he finished speaking, Gray heard the wind behind him, and a huge black shadow smashed at the back of his head. It was a huge 2-handed hammer. If he was hit by this fellow, his brains would definitely splatter and he would die on the spot. Just as he raised the sword to block, he found that his body was soft and could not exert any strength. Gray was shocked, and then despair surged from the bottom of his heart. It's over. Gray closed his eyes sadly. The moment before he died, countless images flashed in his mind. Power, honor, money, status. Everything he had was smashed to pieces by that huge 2-handed hammer. Right at this moment, a light flashed with a whoosh. The huge 2-handed hammer stopped, and a ferocious and twisted head rolled to the ground and spun a few times. Oh? Gray was stunned. At this time, a familiar figure came into his sight. Alice, it's you? Gray looked and was surprised and happy. You're not dead yet? At this moment, Alice stood in front of Gray and did not speak. Her face was like ice that had not melted in 10,000 years, and her cold eyes calmly looked at Gray. That's great. Gray grabbed Alice. I thought you were killed by that bastard beast man called Long. Quick, follow me. Let's destroy the spatial door together. This is Sir John's order. Gray spoke like a machine gun, and his face was filled with ecstasy. We can talk later. Now let's get rid of these damn beastmen. There was no concern, no greetings, no emotions. He did not even ask about the process of the matter. In Gray's heart, all of this was not important. He would always only have the mission given by his superiors, because glory, power, and status could only be obtained through missions. If everything went smoothly, Gray, who returned victorious, would undoubtedly be received by the Holy Light Army's Angel Captain Emily. The premise was that he could keep his life. Alice thought in her heart. At this moment, she only felt a bone-piercing chill, and she was extremely disgusted with Gray. Should angels be emotionless battle tools? Then, is such a god worthy of my loyalty? No, angels are also living creatures. They are also advanced creatures with flesh and blood and rich emotions. We are not machines, not battle tools. We have our own thoughts and beliefs. We will never pledge loyalty to that damn army for some illusory god. Thinking of this, the murderous intent in Alice's eyes gradually condensed. Her sapphire-like eyes turned red in an instant, filled with a sense of evil. At this time, Gray felt a trace of strangeness. He turned around and felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. An exquisite angelic sword pierced deeply into his chest. Alice, Gray's eyes widened. Shock, fear, and confusion instantly appeared on his face. Until this moment, Gray could not believe that Alice would actually kill him. Not only were the angels from the Holy Light Army stunned by this scene, but even the beastmen were stunned. An angel killing another angel. This was too unbelievable. Was this betrayal? Silence. The battlefield was dead silent, and everyone in the battle stopped. It was as if only the cold Alice and the incredulous Gray were left in the gate of heaven and earth. The sharp long sword pierced through his body, and blood flowed down along the broken armor. Why? At this time, Gray calmed down instead. His eyes were fixed on Alice as he asked softly, "For freedom." After Alice said this coldly, she twisted the long sword in her hand, and Gray's body fell heavily to the ground. Gray struggled to open his eyes. He felt that his life force was rapidly fading away. The dying Gray seemed to see a strange scene at this moment. Alice's long golden hair turned white, the white wings behind her turned black, and her beautiful blue eyes turned a strange blood red. The power of Guangming that symbolized holiness had long disappeared, and what replaced it was the black flames from hell. Angels who betrayed the gods were no longer angels. They betrayed the gods, abandoned the noble faith they were born with, and threw themselves into the arms of the devil in exchange for greater power. They were the symbols of evil, fear, and bloodthirstiness. They had another name: fallen angels. This is the legendary fallen angel who betrayed the gods. Why? Why did Alice? Chapter 879. With black wings, blood-red eyes, a cold face, and a strange and terrifying aura, the appearance of the fallen angel caused the entire battlefield to be in an uproar. The orcs looked at the terrifying and strange creature in front of them in shock and were speechless for a moment. Alice closed her eyes and felt the power that was becoming more and more abundant, as if it was spurting out from the bottom of her heart. Her heart, that had been bound for a long time, finally broke free from its shackles. The feeling of being unrestrained made Alice feel extremely carefree. Alice's power kept rising. The surging black flames burned the sky and kept spreading in all directions, emitting a strange and powerful aura. Is this the power of freedom? Alice closed her eyes tightly, as if treating the surrounding orcs like wolves and tigers as air. She quietly felt the power gushing out from the bottom of her heart. At this moment, she felt that her power was infinitely close to that of a god. Not bad. This is the feeling, Alice muttered to herself. At this moment, with a swish, she opened her eyes without any warning. Her blood-red eyes instantly shot out a bright light. She suddenly took a step forward, and the black flames on her body burned brightly. This is the power of freedom. Finally, the surrounding orcs recovered from their shock. They seemed to realize that this strange fellow in front of them was also their enemy. Roar, kill! Kill her! An orc soldier raised his axe and roared. The rest of the orcs swarmed forward and charged at Alice with all sorts of weapons in their hands. Hee. A disdainful smile appeared on Alice's face. Her eyes gradually became fierce as she slowly raised the long sword in her hand and let out a sharp whistle. At this moment, there was a loud bang, and a large hole suddenly split open in the flat ground. Some orcs could not stand steadily and fell in. Help! I'm falling. Oh my God, what's biting me? It hurts. My leg. Where did my leg go? The orc soldier shouted. At this moment, they discovered in horror that the collapsed hole was filled with densely packed crypt spiders. They were opening their mouths wide, revealing sharp and white teeth. Boom! 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 As the ground cracked open, countless crypt spiders surged out and fought with the orcs. Although the crypt spiders were weak, their numbers were terrifying. In an instant, they flooded the entire plaza. On the other side of the forgotten city. Boom! With an earth-shattering boom, the two figures in the sky finally separated. Ron was panting slightly, his expression a little haggard. He had gone through a series of battles, and his strength was almost depleted. Compared to Ron, who had suddenly appeared, he was slightly inferior. Who are you? Human, tell me your name. Long, who was fighting with Ron, stopped and asked coldly. I'm Ron. Ron paused for a moment, smiled, and waved the Calamity God staff in his hand. And the new Lich King. Lich King? Long's body trembled when he heard this. His mouth opened slightly in surprise, but he quickly returned to normal. So that's how it is. No wonder your strength feels so familiar, even though you're far inferior to him. Long paused. So, your goal is to take back the Forgotten City? No, Ron coldly interrupted him. Not just the Forgotten City, I want to take back everything. Take back everything that belongs to the undead. Lung furrowed his brows, and then his eyes glowed. He stared coldly at Ron, and an intense killing intent poured out of him without restraint. Ron fearlessly looked back at Long, but the skull of the Calamity God staff in his hand spun faster and faster. At that moment, the center of the Forgotten City suddenly flashed, following which a massive explosion sounded out. Following this, a blue light shot into the sky, forming a gigantic pillar of light in the air. The spatial gate. Ron looked in the direction of the spatial gate in the center of the Forgotten City and let out a long sigh, a hint of joy appearing on his face. Alice has completed her mission well. The spatial gate was finally destroyed. It was completely and unreservedly destroyed. All of this also announced the end of the Orcs' rule in the undead main plane. The Forgotten City, one of the largest undead castellans in the undead main plane, had finally returned to the hands of the undead. Long's back was facing the spatial gate. He didn't even look back at the blue pillar of light that soared into the sky. His face was terrifyingly calm, as if he had already expected all of this. He only quietly stared at Ron, not saying a word for a long time. It's all over. At this moment, Long let out a long sigh, looking as if he had aged more than 10 years in an instant. The killing intent in his eyes dimmed. I have to say congratulations. Ron, you've won. Destroying the spatial gate, forming an alliance with the Spider Queen Lolth, and taking advantage of the fact that the Orcs and Angels were both heavily injured to lead the army back, securing victory in one fell swoop. With the situation as it was, there was no turning back, so Long didn't say anything more. Ron's heart trembled. You're leaving? There's no point in staying any longer. Long smiled faintly and looked deeply at Ron. He took out something from his bosom and calmly tore it open. It was a spatial scroll. After it was torn open, a light blue spatial energy instantly enveloped Long. Ron didn't stop him. He silently watched as Long's figure slowly disappeared from the light. He knew that he had won. Why? Why do you Orcs want to occupy the place of the undead? Is it just for the sake of black crystal coins? As Long's figure was about to disappear, Ron finally couldn't help but ask this question. Long glanced at Ron with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He smiled coldly and gave an answer that Ron didn't quite understand, but he would never forget. Orcs will never be slaves. Chapter 880. The undead army had completely surged into the Forgotten City. In the city, they were engaged in a great battle with the Orcs and the remnants of the Angel army. Due to Long's departure, the Orcs surrendered to the Scourge army one after another. Only the Holy Light Angel army was still stubbornly resisting. However, at this moment, they had already been divided and surrounded by the Scourge army. Defeat was only a matter of time. Blood. Everywhere one could see was blood. It was a sea of blood. At this point in the war, the entire Forgotten City had become a hellish battlefield. Jean was already surrounded in a small corner of the Forgotten City. Around him, in front of him, in the air, there were enemies everywhere. There were only a few angels around him. At this moment, John looked as if he had been fished out of a pool of blood. After the fierce battle with Long and Rose, he looked rather miserable. His armor, which was exquisitely carved with patterns, was shattered beyond recognition. His golden wings were also stained with blood. However, his body was still upright, and his whole body exuded an unparalleled fighting spirit. The combat power of the undead soldiers was not strong. The combat power of 10 undead soldiers could not compare to that of a soldier from the main plane of order. However, at this time and place, there were too many undead soldiers. Even if the summoned undead creatures were not included, their numbers were 10 times more than theirs. Even if John was as powerful as a god, he could not contend against the Scourge army. Moreover, there was still Rose holding them back. At this moment, an enormous abomination suddenly appeared from the side. It held a huge long sword in its hand and viciously slashed at the defenseless John. John let out a scream. He turned around abruptly. His handsome face was ferocious and ferocious. Holy light illumination. John raised the long sword in his hand high. A dazzling light was released from the tip of the sword and spread in all directions. Boom! The light burned fiercely like flames. All the undead creatures around were turned into ashes. The abomination that had attacked John earlier was burned until only its skeleton was left. It staggered and fell to the ground. Even if the power of a god was already at the end of its power, it was not something that ordinary small fries could blaspheme. Lord John. Just as John was heaving a sigh of relief, he heard a voice by his ear. It was an angel covered in blood. He was panting as he said to him, Lord John, quickly retreat. We can't hold on any longer. Retreat? Hardadef was stunned. This was a word that couldn't be found in his dictionary, and it sounded so foreign and ear-piercing. The high and mighty angel race, who stood at the pinnacle of the main plane, was also defeated. This was unbelievable in the eyes of other races, but in fact, they were indeed defeated and utterly defeated. This was a deep humiliation. In that instant, Hardadef's eyes were filled with intense fury. Hundreds of thousands of angels had set out to conquer the forgotten city, but they had returned empty-handed. This was something that the proud Hardadef couldn't accept. However, this wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that the ones who had defeated the Holy Light Angel army weren't the orcs, who were known for their savagery and cunning. Instead, it was the undead, who were viewed as trash by all the major planes. This undead, who were looked down upon by all the races in the main plane, who were even inferior to the lowest slaves, had defeated the strongest angel army in the main plane. Hardadef could almost imagine that when this news reached the order plane, he would become the biggest laughingstock. John clenched his fists. His tall body trembled uncontrollably. Subconsciously, the order to fight to the death almost came out of his mouth. Lord John, what's wrong? The angel beside him looked at John's uncertain expression and couldn't help but worry. Lord, are your injuries okay? I'm fine. But in the end, John forced himself to endure. He took a deep breath and instantly regained his rationality. He thought quickly and said coldly, Pass down my order. Break out immediately. Yes, Lord John. The angel received the order and left. Whoosh, pa. Several white light bullets rose into the air and scattered in the air like fireworks. They turned into spots of light that enveloped the entire forgotten city and didn't dissipate for a long time. This was the signal for the Holy Light Angel Corps to retreat. Seeing this signal, the Holy Light Angel Corps soldiers were immediately energized. They burst out with all their strength and quickly killed their way out of the encirclement. Then, they quickly gathered in one direction. What are they doing? Ron asked, puzzled. He looked at Shea beside him. The latter shook her head, indicating that she didn't know. They're retreating. At this moment, Rose slowly walked closer. At this moment, she had already returned to her human appearance. She was elegant and arrogant. It was almost impossible to associate her with the huge monster in heavy armor from before. Retreating, Ron's eyebrows twitched. Should we pursue? No. Rose shook her head. We don't have the ability to stop them. We'll only increase the number of casualties in vain. Before Ron could say anything, the Holy Light Angel Corps had already gathered their troops. Despite going through a series of fierce battles, the Holy Light Angel Corps, from the angels to the ordinary soldiers, still maintained a vigorous fighting spirit. They maintained a tight battle formation, with the warriors and knights on the periphery and the archers and priests in the middle. They slowly and neatly withdrew in an orderly manner. At this moment, Ron understood that Rose's decision was correct. Even if they launched an attack now, it wouldn't have any effect. He had to admit that his experience on the battlefield and his judgment of the situation were far inferior to Rose's. John led the angel army out of the city, and only after seeing that the undead did not chase after them did he relax. Before leaving, He looked at the forgotten city that had brought him humiliation and failure, and he clenched his fists tightly. I will definitely return. Undead. Chapter 881. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Millions of crypt spiders marched into the city, forming a torrent of steel that caused the entire forgotten city to tremble. So this is the forgotten city. Ron stood on top of the city wall, quietly looking down at the devastated city that had gone through a series of battles. His heart was filled with emotion. He had returned once again, but unlike last time, this time he appeared in the forgotten city as a conqueror. Ron could even see the expressions of the residents through the thick city wall. Their faces were filled with unease and fear, especially the orcs in the city. Although Ron had retreated, he had left behind more than 10 orcs that were good at fighting, as well as the hundreds of thousands of orc residents in the Forgotten City. Some of the orcs had lived here since the Frost Wolf Corps occupied the Forgotten City, and some had even reproduced for several generations. However, how to deal with these orcs was a problem that gave Ron quite a headache. If he killed them, he would have provoked a powerful enemy for no reason. Many of them were members of the Frost Wolf Corps. If he left them alive, they would be useless and would be a waste of food. The appetite of these burly orcs was more than that of 7 undead. In the end, Ron still banished them from the city. As for whether they lived or died after leaving the city, he didn't care so much. After the fierce battle, the smell of blood still lingered on the streets of the Forgotten City, but the corpses on the ground had been cleaned up. For these undead who dealt with corpses all day long, cleaning up the corpses of an entire city wasn't too difficult. The city hall built by the orcs in the center of the Forgotten City had been torn down and replaced with the iconic Undead Hall. In a huge circular hall, Ron, Rose, Shea, Cronia, Alice, and the newly joined wise Mr. Zilio were all sitting there. They had to face the problem of how to seize control of the Forgotten City and how to control the entire Hakant district. Cronia knew the Hakant district like the back of her hand. She was the leader of the Shadow Thieves and had an all-pervasive intelligence network. She even had spies in the Forgotten City that was under the control of the orcs. At this moment, as the master of the Forgotten City, she stood in front of a large map and spoke with assurance. Ron and the others listened attentively. So, we have to use the Forgotten City as the center and further expand our forces. As for the scattered thieves around, we have to send people to persuade them to surrender. Of course, if they don't know what's good for them, we'll just kill them. Cronia waved her hand and made a kill gesture. Ron nodded inwardly. He smiled and gestured for her to continue speaking. With the encouragement of the Lich King Ron, Cronia's spirits were lifted. She continued to point at the map and said, aside from the numerous thieves in the Hakant district, there are also a large number of exotic beasts from the Divine Domain. They are distributed here. Cronia pointed at a few places. Ron looked and saw that the places Cronia pointed at were basically places of death where humans rarely tread. It was not surprising that there were exotic beasts living there. Are there any divine beasts? Ron asked at this moment. Yes. Cronia hesitated for a moment. However, we don't have accurate information on their exact locations. After all, no one dares to enter the territory of divine beasts. Those who enter all die. Although the information isn't accurate, we have a rough idea that it's here and here. Cronia pointed at the top of the map and said, 2 divine beasts. Ron took a deep breath. Divine tier exotic beasts lived alone. Since Cronia had pointed to 2 places, it meant that there were 2 of them. Luckily, there aren't many of them. Ron scratched his head and looked at the Spider Queen Lolth. 1 each? No problem. Lolth agreed with a smile. I need several demigod necromancers, several dozen frost dragons, several hundred great liches, several thousand sacred domain necromancers, death knights, catapults, skeletal holy statues. Lolth listed a series of huge orders in one breath. Ron's jaw dropped, his eyes wide open. Stop! 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 Ron finally couldn't take it anymore. He frowned and said, Aren't we just going to kill a divine beast? Why does it sound like we're going to start a war? Lolth rolled her eyes at him and spread her hands. Do you think divine beasts are so easy to kill? I'm not like you necromancers who can summon a bunch of undead creatures with a single incantation. I can't just bring my spider army, right? They won't be able to last a single round in front of divine strength. Without the cooperation of powerful troops, the cave spiders will only be sending themselves to their deaths. Even so, you can't bring so many troops. If you do that, the entire Forgotten City's military strength will basically be empty. Ron smiled embarrassedly. Moreover, I don't have that many troops to allocate to you. Black crystal coins are enough. Isn't this the reason why we seized the Forgotten City? Lowell smiled and said, immediately start building undead buildings. Troops, equipment, money, you can have as much as you want. Black crystal coins, huh? Ron thought for a moment. Before he could reply, he heard the door of the Hall of the Dead being slammed open with a bang. White rushed in, his face terrifyingly pale. Lord Lich King, not good. I just found the warehouse of black crystal coins discovered. There isn't even a single black crystal coin left. What? Everyone in the hall stood up in shock when they heard this. There isn't even a single black crystal coin left? Damned beastmen. Cronia was the first to understand and cursed in a low voice. It turned out that when the Battle of the Forgotten City was about to start, Long had already transported away all the black crystal coins in the Forgotten City, leaving behind an empty city for Ron. From Long's point of view, such a move wasn't strange. However, it was very disadvantageous for Ron. Although the black crystal mine was still there, some plans had to be put aside for the time being. That's it, Ron said helplessly. We'll first build the ghost mines and wait until we have enough black crystal coins before proceeding with the next step of the plan. At the same time, on the other side of the undead plain, the Torata district, located in the south, was a famous land of plague. There was a low-lying swamp that stretched as far as the eye could see. Crisscrossing water webs divided the entire area, forming a fragmented swamp plain. On this boundless swamp plain, hundreds of thousands of troops were packed densely together. Both sides were tensely confronting each other, emitting countless magical radiances. Swish! A sound was heard. A green war flag fluttered in the wind within one side of the army. This war flag was embroidered with an incomparably large skull. Strangely, two large skeletal wings spread out from the back of this skull. When the breeze blew, this skeleton war flag seemed to come alive, becoming increasingly ferocious. This was the skeleton war flag of the Plague Legion. The commander of this undead army was a tall, undead youth with slender limbs. He was an undead warrior who wore simple, sturdy half-body light armor. He appeared to be extremely astute and capable. Although he had sacrificed a portion of his defense, he had gained an even greater speed. The young undead warrior was staring coldly in front of him. His expression was grave, and cold, killing intent was constantly condensing in his eyes. Judging from the broken warrior armor and the bloodstains on his body, he had already experienced a series of battles. Gibbon was the seventh son of the Dreadlord Saruman. He was even more powerful than when Ron had first met him. He had already reached the level of a demigod and was appointed as the commander of this army by Saruman. Behind him was a huge, winding river. The water in this river was not ordinary water. It was green and contained a strong poison. Torata meant poison in the ancient language of the undead. This huge river was a famous river in the Torata district, the River of Poison. There was not a single blade of grass growing on either side of the River of Poison. It was filled with traces of decay. Opposite the Plague Legion was another undead army. Their flag was the blood-red skull war flag of the Scourge Legion, which had caused people to tremble in fear 100,000 years ago. The commander of the Scourge Legion was a young female Death Knight. Her name was Adele. She had a head of glossy black curly hair draped behind her head. Her heavy armor tightly wrapped around her graceful body. At this moment, she was riding on the back of a huge death warhorse. The death warhorse's hooves were burning with blue flames. In the spring of this year, the Scourge Legion suddenly launched a war. They led millions of troops south, vowing to destroy the Plague Legion and unify the entire undead main plane. The Dreadlord Saruman hastily recruited an army to fight. Adele's 13th Royal Guard Legion met the Plague Legion's Gibbon Legion in the Frozen Valley. A great battle broke out between the two sides. The hastily summoned Plague Legion's Gibbon Legion was defeated by the 13th Royal Guard Legion, led by Adele. After that, the Gibbon Legion's Gibbon Legion launched a few more battles. However, they were easily defeated by the experienced and powerful Adele, who achieved one glorious victory after another. In the end, the Gibbon Legion retreated to the River of Poison, where they were firmly surrounded by Adele. Victory was in her hands. At this moment, the corners of Adele's mouth curled up, revealing a relaxed smile. Gibbon, surrender. You've been surrounded. Adele slowly opened her mouth, a contemptuous smile appearing on her face. Ha ha! Hearing this, Gibbon laughed maniacally. At this moment, he said coldly, "Stop dreaming, Adele. The Plague Legion only has undead who die in battle. There are no undead who surrender. Even if I, Gibbon, want to surrender, I won't surrender to you. The lackeys of the Legion of Holy Angels. Yes, the lackeys of the Legion of Holy Angels. Go to hell, traitors of the undead. Bah! You're a disgrace to the undead." As soon as these words were spoken, the undead of the Plague Legion all started cursing. They looked at the Scourge Legion soldiers opposite them with eyes full of hatred. Amidst the cursing, the undead soldiers of the Scourge Legion started to become restless. All of the undead looked at their commander with suspicious expressions. A feeling of unease spread through the army. This was the Achilles heel of the Scourge Legion. It was also the reason why many undead questioned the legitimacy of Fismai as the successor of the Scourge Legion. 100,000 years ago, the war between the Scourge Legion and the Legion of Holy Angels had shaken the entire main plane. Both sides had suffered countless casualties, and almost all races had been involved. Now, the Scourge Legion and the Legion of Holy Angels were so close that they were practically wearing the same pants. They were just short of forming an alliance. It was impossible not to suspect that there was something fishy going on. Even within the Scourge Legion, the voices of doubt towards Fismai had never stopped. Some undead even suspected that he was a spy sent by the Legion of Holy Angels. Adele's expression changed. The words, "lackey of the Legion of Holy Angels," pierced her heart deeply. Not too long ago, she had also been one of the Death Knights who had doubted Fismai's qualifications as the successor. However, ever since she had been recognized by Fismai and was promoted to the head of the 13th Death Knight Regiment of the Royal Guards, commanding over 1 million undead, she had never thought of this problem again. However, this did not mean that Adele did not have doubts in her heart. Adele took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, "Gibbon, since you suspect His Majesty the Divine King, then I'll capture you and send you to His Majesty. You can go and tell him personally, 'Kill.'" At this moment, Adele raised the long sword in her hand without any warning and let out a shout. Immediately after, the 13th Death Knight Regiment began to charge. Boom, boom, boom. Shouts of killing filled the mountains and plains as the powerful cavalry regiment began to charge. Those heavily armored Death Knights were completely unafraid of the oncoming rain of arrows. The undead horses beneath them raised their hooves, causing splashes to appear in the swamp. Adele knew that now was not the time to talk about this problem. This problem originated from 100,000 years ago and was simply a mess that could not be resolved. However, both sides of the battle were undead. Once this problem was discussed, it would greatly affect the morale of the army and the fighting spirit of the soldiers. Adele had graduated from the Royal Military Academy of the Scourge Legion and had joined the army as soon as she graduated. She started from the lowest level of commander and rose step by step to become the head of the 13th Death Knight Regiment. Her combat experience was incomparably rich. She knew that the most correct action now was not words, but weapons. Thus, the moment she made her move, she blocked Gibbon's following words. "Sir Gibbon, what do we do?" Faced with the undead that covered the mountains and plains, the undead soldiers of the Plague Legion were already scared out of their wits. An undead soldier whispered in Gibbon's ear, his voice trembling slightly. Gibbon stared fixedly at Adele, who was not far away, his eyes seemingly about to spit fire. He hated this woman to the core. Her superb commanding skills and skilled combat experience had caused him to suffer setbacks time and time again. The prestige and dignity that he had painstakingly built up over the years had been exhausted in the face of these failures. Pass down the order, break out immediately. Chapter 882. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The Plague Legion began their charge. All the undead soldiers roared and rushed towards the northwest. That was the direction of the main city of the Plague Legion. Stop them. Surround them. Adele was already prepared. This top student of the Royal Military Academy of the Calamity Legion saw through Gibbon's intentions at a glance. She deployed a large number of troops in the northwest direction. At Adele's command, countless undead crawled out from the ground. The ghouls bared their ghastly white fangs, and the gigantic abomination swayed as it approached, like a disgusting mass of meat moving. Gibbon's whole body emitted faint green flames. He held the sacred weapon, the two-handed sword, and spun quickly. Swish! A burst of green light flashed, and an abomination's head rolled down. Its heavy body fell with a loud crash, creating a large green splash. Kill! 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 At this moment, Gibbon was like a mad tiger, as if he wanted to release the anger in his heart. He quickly killed his way out. Stop him! At Adele's command, more undead soldiers rushed out. Among them, there was no lack of undead with extremely high defense. Adele was very smart. These soldiers were purely used to exhaust Gibbon's strength. She wanted to capture Gibbon alive. Want to capture me? Dream on. Gibbon's eyes flashed fiercely. He shouted and raised a long sword in his hand. In an instant, a dazzling light burst out, illuminating the entire battlefield. The divine power of death, oh my God. It's the divine power of death. Run! When the divine power appeared, the undead soldiers of the Calamity Legion panicked. They screamed and wanted to escape, but found that it was too late. Boom! There was a sudden clap of thunder. The long sword slashed down, and a row of huge green water pillars rose high, forming a long, straight line in the swamp. All the undead in the line were turned into ashes. What a powerful, divine power. The huge power even caused a trace of astonishment to flash across Adele's face. Immediately, her face returned to normal, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. It's a pity that you're not a god. After this wave, you won't have much power left, right? Who? After using the divine power skill, Gibbon's face became even more ferocious and his strength was greatly depleted. At this time, he saw Adele, who was close by, and a trace of killing intent flashed in his eyes. Swish! Gibbon's figure disappeared from the spot. In the next moment, he appeared above Adele and ruthlessly slashed down with his sword. Boom! Adele was not in a hurry. She raised her shield to block and fought for several rounds. Damn it! This was the first time the two sides had fought, but Gibbon did not take the slightest advantage in front of Adele. He cursed fiercely and attacked even more fiercely. Hee, I'm not going to play with you anymore. At this moment, Adele chuckled. She took a step back on her death charger, turned around, and disappeared into the zombie horde. Don't run if you have the guts. I will kill you with my own hands. Gibbon did not expect such a move and missed. His eyes were about to spit fire. Hee, you still want to kill me? Idiot, take a look behind you. Adele's voice sounded in his ears. Gibbon turned around, and his heart sank. In just a moment, there were already corpses lying on the ground behind him. His loyal undead soldiers were slaughtered like hounds by the undead soldiers of the Scourge army. Damn it, Gibbon was so regretful that his intestines turned green. He immediately went back to kill. Unfortunately, in a situation where there was a great disparity in strength, Gibbon could not salvage the situation no matter how strong he was. The undead soldiers of the Scourge army surged forward like a tide and swallowed them up in an instant. The combat power of the undead was not strong in general, but that was in comparison to the orcs and angels. However, the difference in strength between the undead of the Scourge army and the undead of the Plague army was not big. Fresh blood had already dyed the ground red. The entire swamp area had turned into the sound of Azura. The battle by the poisonous river was nearing its end. Adele's figure emerged from the army. At this moment, she was sitting quietly on the back of the war horse of death with a cold smile on her lips. In terms of strength, she was not below Jibin. The reason why she avoided him and did not fight him was because she did not want to provoke a mad dog when victory was already in her grasp. The swarming undead had already drowned Jibin. At this moment, he was already in despair. Am I really going to die? This is good too. I don't have to face the humiliation of failure anymore. Jibin smiled slightly. At this moment, he gave up resisting. At this moment, a bugle horn sounded from not far away. It clearly entered everyone's ears and the ground shook. What? Adele frowned. She lowered her head and stared at the circular ripples on the ground. Her expression was unprecedentedly serious. Pass down the order. We are retreating, Adele said decisively. What? An undead general was shocked. At the same time, he did not understand and hurriedly said, Lady Adele, we are about to destroy them. Why are we retreating now? Adele did not even look at the undead general. The main force of the Plague army is here. It looks like they want to surround and annihilate us. Carry out the order immediately. If we are late, it will be too late. Yes. That undead general did not dare to delay and immediately replied. Woo, woo, woo. Amidst the high-pitched bugle horn, the Scourge's undead army retreated like a tide, as if they had never been here. The Plague army had indeed planned to surround Adele's army. However, before the encirclement could be formed, she had already broken through. Finally, the Plague army found Jibin, who was no longer in human form, on a relatively dry hillside. Susie, it's you? You're finally here. Jibin opened his eyes with difficulty. At this moment, he only had one breath left. It's me. Susie forced herself to be calm, but her eyes were already red. She turned around and shouted, Send someone to treat him immediately. No, there's no need. Jibin supported his body with difficulty. Let me just die like this. This battle has ended like this. I don't have the face to see my father. No, this is not your fault. Susie's tears finally fell uncontrollably. She reached out and grabbed Jibin's hand. Get up. Your father wants to see you. Jibin was shocked when he heard this. My father wants to see me. Chapter 883. Gade. It was almost evening. Hundreds of death chariots lined up in a row and arrived in front of a huge green castle. The guards on top of the castle looked down and shouted a few words. Then, the mechanism on the castle gate turned and a drawbridge descended from above, directly crossing the wide moat. The heavy castle gate slowly opened, and a group of people dismounted and slowly walked into the castle. Plague City, a huge city in the southern part of Torata district, was also the main city of the Plague Legion. In a wide and gloomy corridor, Jibin slowly walked alone. At this moment, his palms were full of sweat. Not long after, Jibin walked to the end of the corridor. In front of him was a huge vermilion door. The lock on the door was like two devil's eyes. Under the dim light, it looked even more eerie and strange. Jibin's heart thumped loudly when he reached the door. He took a deep breath and suppressed the fear in his heart. He reached out to knock on the door, but before his hand could touch the door, a vigorous and powerful voice came from inside. Come in. Father. Jibin pushed open the door and walked into his father's study. He was a little uneasy. He nervously called out and then stood to the side, secretly looking up at his father's expression. In the darkness, a pale and square face and a tall and sturdy body slowly appeared. He was a head taller than Jibin, who was an undead warrior. He wore a purple robe, two small horns protruding from his thick black hair. His slightly upturned mouth revealed two eerie canine teeth. He was Ji-bin's father, the commander of the Plague Legion, Dread King Saruman. At this moment, his expression was full of majesty, and the intimidating aura oppressed Ji-bin so much that he did not dare to breathe loudly. "You're back." Saruman looked at Ji-bin from head to toe and said pleasantly. He pulled out the chair next to the desk and sat down. "Yes, father." Ji-bin looked at his father's expression and was slightly relieved. He eagerly picked up the wine on the desk, poured a cup, and placed it in front of his father. He said softly, "Father, you're looking for me?" "Yes." Saruman nodded slowly, picked up the wine cup, and took a sip. "Don't go to the front line for this period of time." "What?" Upon hearing this, Ji-bin's heart sank. The thing he was most worried about had happened. His father was going to strip him of his military power. However, the next sentence made him feel slightly relieved. "Because the Calamity Troop is going to retreat. So it's not to deprive me of my military power," Ji-bin thought with lingering fear. In the main plane, having no military power meant having no status. The Scourge is retreating? How is that possible? Ji-bin was even more shocked. In order to destroy the Plague Legion, the Scourge had prepared for a long time. Then, they went on a large-scale expedition to the south and defeated the Plague Legion. Now that the situation was good, why would they suddenly retreat? Ji-bin wouldn't believe it, even if he was beaten to death. But when it came from his father's mouth, he couldn't help but believe it. He thought for a moment and said in surprise, Could it be that Lord Saul has made a move?" Thor was the commander of the Burning Legion in the main plane of Hell, one of the most powerful forces in Hell. Over the years, the Plague Legion had not been wiped out by the Scourge because of the help of the Burning Legion. In addition, although the Dreadlord Saruman was an undead, he was half-demon. This was one of the reasons why Thor was willing to help him. "No." Saruman smiled. Saruman smiled, stood up with a glass of wine, and left the desk. Ji-bin quickly followed. "Although I have thought of asking Lord Saul for help, the situation is a little different this time." Saruman slowly approached a long sofa in the study and sat down in a more comfortable position. He smiled at Ji-bin. His expression was more relaxed, and it was obvious that he was in a good mood. Saruman smiled. "Ji-bin, do you still remember the Forgotten City?" "Yes, why?" Ji-bin didn't react for a moment. "It's now occupied by a group of undead." "What?" When Ji-bin heard this, he was shocked. Wait, wasn't the Forgotten City occupied by a group of ferocious orcs? How could it be undead? This is the reason why they want to retreat now. Saruman smiled and said, "Now, we are no longer the main target of the Scourge." "I can't believe it." Ji-bin's eyes widened in disbelief. "The undead actually chased away the orcs." "Father, is there some other conspiracy behind this?" "No." Saruman tilted his head and thought for a moment. "They took back the Forgotten City from the orcs. Although I don't know how they did it, it's really quite impressive, but this is the reason why they want to retreat. Just because a group of undead occupied the Forgotten City." Ji-bin still didn't understand. "Of course not." Saruman smiled. "The most important thing is that this undead force also calls itself the Scourge. Their leader is also called the Lich King." Haha, this is very interesting. The Lich King. Ji-bin was shocked. At this moment, he thought of Nicole, who he met in the Snow Orchid continent. His heart couldn't help but tighten. Could it be that the Scourge Divine Staff? After the Scourge chased away the orcs and occupied the Forgotten City, they continued to expand and gather various forces. Haha, that fellow Fismai finally couldn't sit still. Saruman raised his wine glass and smiled. He pointed at Ji-bin. Haha, I think I'll be busy for a while. It's also time for us to make some preparations. The sky gradually darkened. In a valley with its back to the light, a large number of undead creatures were active. There were slow-moving, walking corpses, huge ghouls, and disgusting creatures that were as ugly as a lump of meat. Coming here was like entering a gloomy and terrifying world of death. Only when you saw 3 to 5 undead warriors sitting in a circle and chatting did you feel a trace of life. This was the temporary camp of the Scourge. Lady Adele, Adele walked back to her tent in a huff. Along the way, the undead greeted her, but she ignored them all. She lifted the curtain of the huge military tent and walked in. She picked up the water bottle on the table and gulped down a few mouthfuls of water. Then she slammed it down heavily. At this moment, Adele had just received the order to retreat. However, she couldn't understand why such a stupid order would appear when the situation was so good. Could it be that the expedition to the south that she had prepared for so many years had been wasted? If she didn't know that the person who had sent the order was the head of the Royal Military Academy of the Scourge and the confidant of the commander of the expedition to the south, Adele swore that she would have pulled out her sword and directly executed him as a spy. However, that person wasn't a spy. The person who had sent the order was also a student of the Royal Military Academy of the Scourge and could be considered Adele's senior. The order he had brought was indeed personally signed by Commander Tito. The expedition to the south is to retreat immediately. The commander and regiment commanders are to return to the ice-crowned fortress and await orders. This time, Adele had nothing to say. She could only stay in her own barracks and sulk. After taking a few deep breaths, Adele slowly calmed down. She knew that Commander Tito had his reasons for doing so. Over the years, the Scourge had achieved victory after victory and successfully defeated the Plague Legion's arrogance in seeking independence. They had recovered most of the lost land and were aiming for the Torata district. Just as they were about to kill their way into Plague City, Tito had announced a retreat at this critical juncture. This was unacceptable to all the undead soldiers who had set out for the expedition. Adele hadn't announced this order to her Death Knights yet. She knew that once this order was announced, it would cause a huge uproar. But why is that? Adele couldn't understand it no matter how she thought about it. At this moment, an undead soldier pushed open the door and entered, bowing to Adele. Chapter 884. In a simple and crude camp not far from the Royal Guard's 13th Death Knight Regiment, the commander of the Scourge Army's southern expedition, Tito, lived here. This semicircular valley had already been transformed into a temporary command post for the Scourge Army's southern expedition. Unlike the heavily guarded Death Knight Regiment's camp, this place was more like a simple and crude little farm. There were only a few knights patrolling back and forth on their death warhorses. However, most of the people here would hide in the shadows to observe the necromancers. Adele rode her death warhorse to the front of an abandoned Magus tower. Just as she jumped off her horse, another handsome death knight quickly came up to her. He placed one hand on his chest and performed a knight salute. "Is it Lady Adele? Master Commander invites you, indirectly." Adele nodded and walked up the few steps. Her hand, which was wearing a black leather glove, lightly pressed on the doorknob and pushed open the door to enter. A ray of sunlight spilled in through the broken window, leaving a long shadow in the simple and crude room. A man who was not very tall had his back facing Adele, his body ramrod straight. "You've come," a low voice sounded, and the man quickly turned around and smiled at Adele. That man had a pale and bloodless face, a standard undead face. It was impossible to tell his age. He wore a very ordinary linen robe and stood there casually, emitting an iron-blooded aura similar to that of a soldier. It was just that his bald head was a little comical. "Yes, I've come, enter." Adele respectfully performed a standard knight's salute. The man in front of her was Tito, the dean of the Scourge Army's Royal Military Academy, the commander of the Southern Expedition, and the strongest person in the Scourge Army. Apart from this, he was also Adele's mentor. "The most beautiful flower in our academy has finally arrived. No wonder I felt that this room seemed to have become much brighter," Tito said with a smile. Adele playfully stuck out her tongue. "Why don't you say that it's the work of your bald head?" Mentor. Hearing this, Tito rubbed his bald head and chuckled. When Adele was studying in the Royal Military Academy, she was rated as one of the top 10 beauties in the academy and had many suitors. Of course, there were differences between beauties. Regardless of beauty, strength, or intelligence, Adele completely crushed the other 9 and was fully deserving of the title of number 1. She improved her strength the fastest, passed the exams in the shortest time, broke many records, and was hailed as a genius. In the end, she directly became the dean's student and was personally taught by Tito. Therefore, Tito's words of the most beautiful flower had a hidden meaning. However, Adele understood that Mentor Tito, who seemed easygoing on the surface, was actually a very strict person. Tito was born in the military and was used to thinking with the mindset of a soldier. To Adele, Mentor Tito's words were orders. Orders had to be carried out immediately and couldn't be discounted. Adele had once been severely punished because she missed one sword move out of 1,000 practice sessions. During the time she studied under Mentor Tito, Adele didn't live in the academy so much as in the military camp. However, in private, Tito still treated Adele, this genius student, quite well. Adele's strength, being able to rise from the high level of the sacred domain to the peak of the divine domain, was largely due to Tito's efforts. The two exchanged a few pleasantries and quickly got to the main topic. Mentor, why do we have to retreat? Adele said bluntly. She knew that her mentor didn't like too much nonsense. Because of His Majesty the Divine Emperor's order, Tito said with a smile. His Majesty the Divine Emperor? Adele frowned. Mentor, forgive me for being blunt, but I don't think His Majesty the Divine Emperor should he give such a stupid order? Seeing Adele's hesitation, Tito said directly. With his status and position in the Scourge, he wasn't disrespectful to His Majesty the Divine Emperor, but it wasn't appropriate for him to do so to Adele. Adele nodded slightly and fell silent. Tito smiled. If it's just this war, this order is indeed very stupid, no matter the reason. In fact, with my current power, I can choose to refuse under such circumstances, but Tito paused for a moment. But this time I chose to obey. Why? Adele's expression was somewhat astonished, but it disappeared in a flash. She knew that what her mentor was going to say next was the main point. Because the Southern Expedition Army has more important things to do. Tito glanced at Adele and started pacing in the room with his hands behind his back. He continued, there's news from the Iceground Castle. Important news. A group of undead has appeared in the northwest of the main undead plain. They've occupied the Forgotten City and are continuously expanding towards Hakant. Seeing that Adele was about to speak, Tito impatiently shook the ground and continued, but this isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is this group of undead that popped out of nowhere actually calls themselves the Scourge Army. What? Scourge Army? Adele's eyes widened and an expression of extreme disbelief appeared on her face. Wait. Mentor Tito, isn't Hakant? Isn't it the territory of the orcs? Hearing this, Tito's face imperceptibly shrank. 100,000 years ago, on the 7th day after the orcs occupied the Forgotten City, the Scourge Emperor Fismai had formed an army of undead and majestically charged towards Hakant. Unfortunately, they were defeated by the Frostwolf army, led by Lung, and fled back in a sorry state. This incident had even caused the Scourge army to split up. The Dreadlord Saruman had brought his undead subordinates and left the Iceground Castle. Just like that, the matter of Hakant had been shelved. Adele knew that this incident would forever be a pain in Mentor Tito's life. He had been the one to command that battle. At that time, he had tasted the humiliation of defeat and had also accepted the fact that the Scourge army had fallen from its peak. After losing the Lich King, the Scourge army was like a pile of loose sand. They had been defeated again and again in foreign wars. Large areas of territory had fallen and become the territory of others. After Mentor Tito's explanation, Adele finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. No wonder His Majesty hurriedly transferred the Southern Expeditionary Army up north. Adele thought to herself. She had also developed some admiration for the Scourge army that had driven away the orcs. At this moment, she smiled sweetly. So, Mentor, you're still the one to command this battle, right? Tito's footsteps stopped. He glanced at Adele, but didn't say anything. Very good, Mentor. I think we can join forces again to beat up those bastards. Adele joked. She didn't notice Tito's evasive gaze at all. Adele finally realized that Tito's expression was a bit off. "Dear Mentor, what's wrong?" Tito took a deep breath. "Listen, Adele, I don't think I'll be participating in this battle against the Scourge army. So, I recommended you to His Majesty." "What?" Adele was shocked. This, Mentor, why are you doing this? If I were facing the orcs, perhaps I wouldn't hesitate, even if it meant sacrificing myself. But this time, Adele, I can't possibly make a move against His Majesty, the Lich King." Tito's face revealed a pained expression. Seeing Adele's puzzled expression, Tito sighed and said, "That's right. The leader of the Scourge army also calls himself the Lich King. In fact, he's the successor of His Majesty the Lich King. More importantly, he also possesses the Scourge Staff." "What? The Scourge Staff?" Adele was shocked. She realized the seriousness of the matter. This concerned the legitimacy of the Scourge Emperor Fismer's rule over the undead main plane. Looking at Mentor Tito's expression, it seemed like he wanted to take a neutral stance between the two. Adele took a deep breath and calmed her chaotic thoughts. She calmly stared at Tito. "Mentor, you and His Majesty are both people I respect, but do we have to pay attention to that guy who calls himself the successor of the Lich King? Perhaps he does indeed possess the Scourge Staff, but so what? It's only an ordinary divine weapon. I don't think—" "Adele, you don't understand." Tito smiled and interrupted Adele's words. "The Scourge Staff isn't just a divine weapon. It's the symbol of the Scourge army, but—" "Mentor, no." "Listen, Adele." Adele was a bit anxious, but her words were interrupted by Mentor Tito again. At this time, Tito's expression became extremely grave. "I didn't call you here to argue about this issue. I have no intention of questioning the legitimacy of His Majesty the Divine Emperor, but I also won't participate in any war against His Majesty the Lich King, so—" Tito forced a smile and patted Adele's shoulder. "The recommendation letter is on the table. Adele, consider it carefully. I have no intention of interfering with your choice. For you, this is a good opportunity to perform meritorious deeds." After Tito finished speaking, he slowly walked out of the room, leaving behind a dazed Adele. Chapter 885. Woo, woo, woo. Sounds similar to weeping echoed in the valley amidst the night wind. In this gloomy environment, it made one's hair stand on end. This was the famous Weeping Valley in the main plain of the undead Hakant. A large army slowly walked down the small path in the valley. There were about 1,000 of them, led by a fully armed Death Knight, followed by undead warriors, necromancers, ghouls, meat grinders, 10 Victory Stone statues. Although this group was small in number, every one of them was an elite. Ron sat quietly on the throne of an open carriage, a chair seemingly made of white bones. The blood-red skull flag of the Scourge fluttered behind him. He was pulled by 4 immensely strong undead horses that didn't know fatigue as they carefully entered the Weeping Valley. When hunting a divine tier beast, one couldn't have too many people. Too many people would only make things worse. Recalling his agreement with Rose, they would each take care of one of the 2 divine tier beasts in Hakant. Rose had chosen to go to the Plains of Sorrows first, so he could only go to the Weeping Valley. This is the territory of a divine tier beast. A hint of nervousness flashed across Ron's face. I just don't know what kind of divine tier beast it is. Suddenly, Ron waved his hand, and the advancing carriage immediately stopped. At this moment, a cloud of black fog suddenly appeared in front of Ron. It was a male undead wearing a hood, hiding his expression. When he saw Ron, he knelt on one knee, his expression incomparably respectful. "Sir Lich King, get up, Doug. What's the situation up ahead?" Ron narrowed his eyes, sizing up this unremarkable male undead. He was an undead assassin, a subordinate of Cronia. His strength and loyalty were unquestionable. As an undead assassin, apart from ambushes and assassinations, Doug was best at scouting. This was also the reason why Ron had sent him to scout ahead. "There's nothing out of the ordinary, my lord." Doug stood up, his head still bowed as he replied respectfully. "Very good." Ron nodded. "Let's continue forward." "Yes, Sir Lich King." Doug lowered his head and stood to the side with his hands by his side, making way for them. Ron felt a little strange, but he didn't say anything. The carriage slowly passed by Doug. At this moment, Daogu suddenly raised his head, his black eyes becoming abnormally cold. A cold light flashed in his hand, and at the same time his figure immediately rushed out. "Be careful." Ron's bodyguard wanted to warn him, but it was too late. Daogu held an exquisite dagger in his hand and fiercely stabbed towards Ron's back. At such a close distance, even a god would not be able to bear the consequences. Just as Dao Ji's dagger touched Ron's skin, Ron's figure turned into a black fog and disappeared. He was stabbed? Daogu was stunned at first. Then a chill rose from the bottom of his heart and quickly occupied his heart. In that instant, he knew that his assassination had failed. Cold sweat slowly dripped down from his forehead. At this time, a cold voice came from behind Doug's head. "If you don't plan on telling me who ordered you, then I will guarantee that you will see something more terrifying than death." As soon as Ron finished speaking, the wolf-like soldiers grabbed Daogu, stripped him of his weapons, and tied him up. "I'm sorry, Sir Lich King. I didn't think it through and frightened you." Ron's bodyguard captain walked up and said to Ron with an apologetic expression. At this moment, he still felt a lingering fear. If something really happened to the Lich King, his superior, Lady Shea, would definitely tear him apart alive. "I'm fine." Ron's expression was a bit ugly. Although he was a god and had the dark altar that his soul was entrusted to, in theory he would never die. However, reviving him wasn't an easy task. Not to mention the expensive materials and large amounts of black crystal coins. Just the time alone would take at least 3 months. What could happen in 3 months? There were too many things that could happen. "Speak. Who sent you?" The bodyguard captain walked up and sized up Doug, who was tied up like a rice dumpling, as he said this. Doug knew that he was going to die, so he didn't say anything and closed his eyes. The bodyguard captain glanced at Ron and took a deep breath. "Take him away." A few sturdy bodyguards brought Doug down. They were all powerful death knights with extremely high defense. They were the bane of undead assassins, and dealing with 10 Doug brothers would be a piece of cake. Not long after, Doug's blood-curdling screams could be heard from the lakeside. Not long after, the bodyguard captain returned. His body was covered in blood. He bowed to Ron, who was sitting on the skeletal horse carriage, and said, "Reporting to Sir Lich King, we got the information." "Okay." Ron closed his eyes and nodded. He tried his best to appear calm, but his tightly clenched fists exposed his inner thoughts. This guy was sent by the Scourge. "Oh, sorry. I was talking about that Scourge." The bodyguard captain smiled awkwardly. "It's the one from the Ice Crown Castle. He was bribed with 3,000 black crystal coins. And the one who hired him was..." The bodyguard captain paused and lowered his head to secretly look at the note in his hand. "A guy called Adele. Ice Crown Castle. God Emperor Phizmai. It's here, it's finally here." Ron took a deep breath. Even though he tried his best to conceal his existence, the army wasn't something that could be concealed just because he wanted to. The news of him defeating the Holy Light Angel army and expelling the orcs from the Forgotten City had spread like the wind throughout the undead main plane. It was inevitable that he would attract the attention of some people, not just the undead, but also other races, including Hell and the Abyss. Ron could even keenly sense that with the death of the Lich King, a subtle balance had been maintained in the main plane. Even though the conflicts and wars between the various powers and races had never stopped, these were all small-scale. Once this chaotic and balanced situation was broken, then the hatred and power that had accumulated for 100,000 years would explode in an instant. At that time, a second planar war would descend, and many powers and races would be annihilated. If he had a choice, Ron wouldn't want to be the trigger of this balanced situation at all. But in reality, because of his appearance many things would change. The title of the Scourge Army, the successor of the Lich King Hermes, and the Scourge Divine Staff that represented the highest authority in the Scourge Army. All of these things forced him to face the same question as God Emperor Phasmai. Who is the true ruler of the Scourge Army? Phasmai had found the answer to this question before him, because the other party had already made his move. Doug's assassination was only the beginning. What will come will come. Ron remembered what his mentor Hamelin had taught him. Fear often came from one's own heart, and running away wasn't the best way. A true warrior dared to face the fear in his heart. Ron thought, and his expression gradually became resolute. He looked at the bloodstains on the bodyguard captain's body and smiled. Then, is that guy dead now? Not yet, the bodyguard captain said carefully. But I've cut off all his limbs. Sir Lich King, do you want to interrogate him personally? No need. Ron waved his hand, and the carriage started moving, leaving the bodyguard captain frozen in place. At this moment, Ron's voice sounded in the air. If this guy is unfortunate enough to die, find a place to bury him. The bodyguard captain thought carefully about Ron's words. Did the Lich King want this guy dead or alive? After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't figure out. In the end, he slapped his thigh. Forget it, I don't care. Doug's terrified screams came from the lakeside, accompanied by the mournful cries from the crying valley. In the night, it was especially eerie. Not long after, there was no more sound. Ron didn't have the time to care about the life or death of an assassin. He had a more important problem to deal with, God Emperor Phasmai of the Scourge Army. Perhaps the real challenge was about to begin. At this moment, the ground suddenly shook, and an angry roar seemed to come from the distant horizon. Following that, countless rocks collapsed and fell on the small path that the team was walking on. A strange, cold, and eerie aura instantly filled the entire space. Roar, it seemed to come from afar, but the real threat was already in front of them. At the top of the crying valley, a huge head suddenly appeared. A god-tier beast. A god-tier beast has appeared. The powerful aura caused the entire team to panic, but they eventually calmed down. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless weapons were gripped tightly in their hands, and they nervously looked at the terrifying monster in front of them. It was a crystal-clear dragon head that looked like white bones. Its two eyes were pitch-black sockets, and its wings were like white skeletons. Its huge claws extended out, and it had a long bony tail behind it. What the hell? It's a god-tier, undead dragon. Ron's expression was extremely ugly. He gritted his teeth, and the words seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth. I've been played by Rose. The undead dragon might not be the strongest amongst the god-tier beasts, but it was the most difficult to deal with. This was because it was formless and specialized in soul attacks. Its battle strength was much higher than that of Tiramisu, who was also a god-tier beast. Most importantly, what did its formless body mean? It meant that it was invincible. Ron didn't know what the other god-tier beast was, but this was no longer important. No god-tier beast was more difficult to deal with than the undead dragon. Chapter 886. The huge skeletal body tore open the mountain range, revealing a huge head. The two empty eyes were shining with a bright light, as if they were bright lamps in the night sky. A terrifying aura descended like a nightmare. Everyone was shocked to the point that their faces turned deathly pale, and they trembled. Ron took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He didn't have the time to think about what kind of beast Rose had chosen. Since he was here, he had to face it, pass down the order, get into formation, and prepare for battle. Ron said coldly. His voice spread far and wide through his powerful soul force. Ron's words were no less than a reassuring pill. In an instant, everyone suddenly woke up from their confused and helpless state, and their spirits were greatly shaken. Ron, Lord Lich King. The soldiers cheered and gradually tightened their grip on their weapons, ready for battle. The undead dragon was an expert in soul attacks. Its roar unconsciously released a terrifying aura that had the effect of fear. If it weren't for Ron, the soldiers would have been scared out of their wits. At this moment, the undead dragon roared and its gigantic body swooped down. The undead dragon flew over everyone's heads, its wings covering the sky. A whirlwind blew at the bottom of the valley, causing the Scourge army to be thrown into disarray. At this moment, the undead dragon suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a blue flame. Some of the soldiers couldn't dodge in time and were touched by the blue flame. They screamed and were burned into white skeletons. "Steady, steady," the commander of the Scourge army shouted and ordered the soldiers to counterattack. Boom, boom, boom. Countless necromancy spells were blasted into the sky and scattered in all directions like dazzling fireworks. The spells hit the undead dragon, and it let out an angry roar. A powerful force exploded, causing the earth to tremble. However, to the undead dragon, these attacks were nothing more than an itch. Frost dragon, roar. Some necromancers chanted and began to summon frost dragons. Soon, frost dragons appeared on the battlefield. The undead dragon roared loudly. It opened its mouth and spat out blue flames. Boom! The blue flames with the divine power of death collided with the frost dragon's icy dragon breath. The icy dragon breath instantly dissipated like mist. Those terrifying blue flames only needed to touch a little bit of it to set the undead dragon ablaze. Frost WRMS were the pinnacle of undead creatures, but when encountering a divine tier undead dragon, they could only be abused. In just a short while, dozens of Frost WIRMS were killed by the undead dragon. The difference between a god-tier beast and a god-tier beast was like the difference between heaven and earth. The undead dragon's ferocious nature seemed to have been aroused. It flapped its bone-like wings at lightning speed, and countless blazing blue flames descended from the sky. Boom! 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 The blue flames covered the sky and fell from the sky like raindrops. It was as if Doomsday had arrived. The entire Weeping Valley was set ablaze. The formation of the Calamity Army was immediately disrupted. The undead creatures below the god tier were burned to ashes on the spot. The god tier beast strength was comparable to the gods. It was almost a one-sided massacre for those below the god tier. The undead dragon poured out its power wantonly, turning the entire Weeping Valley into hell. As expected, the undead dragon is the most powerful among the god-tier beasts. Ron stood up and stared at the sky with his dark eyes. His eyes were burning with fighting spirit. At the same time, the Calamity divine staff in his hand suddenly spun quickly. In an instant, the powerful divine power of death quickly condensed. Endless darkness descends upon the world with the smell of depravity and decay. The noble undead walk the world. Let the flowers of death bloom in every corner. Ball of poison. Ron finally finished chanting the last syllable. At this time, he waved the Calamity divine staff in his hand. It was as if the god of death had suddenly opened his eyes. A huge green ball of light blasted into the sky. Boom! The green ball of light hit the undead dragon's abdomen heavily. It then spread out and formed a huge green vortex in the air. The undead dragon let out a miserable cry, and then its body tilted, and its huge body fell heavily to the ground. It hit! It hit! The undead creatures of the Calamity Army cheered loudly. More undead magic bombarded the undead dragon. The ball of poison had a strong corrosive power. A huge hole was opened in the undead dragon's abdomen. Huge bone fragments fell from the sky. The undead dragon's body crashed into the mountain wall. It then spun around and fell heavily to the ground. The undead dragon kept struggling and rolling on the ground. Its wails echoed throughout the valley. The powerful divine power of death kept corroding its body. Its bones and flesh were all turned into ashes. Lord Ron is too powerful. He actually defeated the undead dragon. Of course, he's the successor of the Lich King and the leader of the Calamity Army. Then what about the guy who called himself the Calamity Emperor in the ice-crowned castle? Him. He can only be considered an idiot. Ha ha. Long live. The undead soldiers cheered and looked at Ron with admiration. Ron's invincible image was established in an instant, and his prestige rose to the peak at the same time. It's over? Ron looked at the undead dragon struggling on the ground and furrowed his brows in confusion. This god-tier undead dragon was defeated in one hit? Wasn't a little too weak? Was this the legendary undead dragon that was the most difficult to deal with? Even now, Ron still didn't believe that he had defeated it. Wasn't this victory a little too easy? Perhaps it's very powerful, but its defense is pitifully weak, Ron thought to himself. He slowly lowered the Calamity God's staff. He could already see that the undead dragon was completely motionless. Ron finally let out a sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his tense face. Elander, immediately send someone up to take a look. Ron sat down again and said to the captain of the guards, Elander. He was a middle-aged undead with a long chin and a thick beard. Yes, Lord Lich King. Elander lowered his head and bowed. When he raised his head, Ron saw his eyes full of reverence. Jed, come with me for a moment, Elander said to a brown-haired undead youth beside him. Yes, Uncle Elander. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.